Chapter 480. Perfected being Song Lang broke out in cold sweat. He was a late-stage Jin Dan. Even after releasing the Jin Dan phenomenon, he was only able to fight to a draw against Su Zimo's secret skill. For the first time, perfected being Song Lang realized that the childish and proud scholar from back then had already exceeded his control and expectations. Back in the sect competition, Su Zimo merely relied on his identity as the #1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou to suppress him and embarrass him. But now, this scholar was actually on par with him in terms of combat. The difference between the two of them was an entire major cultivation realm. Back then, perfected being Song Lang cultivated to 6 Meridian Foundation establishment and formed his core, successfully condensing the Jin Dan and cultivating the Jin Dan phenomenon. He believed that his potential was not weaker than anyone else. At the very least, he was one of the top perfected beings of Jin Dan in the territory of the Great Zhou dynasty. But now, everything about him paled in comparison to Su Zimo. Perfected being Song Lang had to admit that he had misjudged in that small town back then. Time could not be reversed and there was no medicine for regret in the world. Right now, he only had a single path: to kill Su Zimo with all his might. He must not be allowed to continue growing. That was the only thought in perfected being Song Lang's mind. Suddenly, Sima Ji of True Fire Sect declared, "Just now, that lad released a secret skill and expended a huge amount of spirit energy. There's no way he can release it a second time." A perfected Jin Dan of Azure Frost Sect hollered, "That's right. Everyone, there's no need to panic. There's nothing to fear about that lad." Before he could finish, his vision darkened as though an incomparably gigantic mountain was looming over his head, covering the skies with a frightening aura as it crashed down. Below the mountain stood more than 10 perfected Jin Dan, who attacked one after another, wanting to shatter the mountain. Clang! 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 Spirit weapons were sent flying one after another. Many spirit arts collided with the mountain and let out a true boom. However, they could not slow down the speed of the mountain's descent. The dozens of Jin Dan perfected Jin Dan were scared out of their wits and fled hurriedly. Unfortunately, it was too late. Rumble! An earth-shattering sound rang out. The void trembled continuously. More than 10 perfected Jin Dan cultivators were crushed on the spot and turned into a pile of meat paste. They sank into the ground and became indistinguishable from one another. This is inborn spiritual weapon. It's an inborn spiritual weapon. Cries of surprise rang out as everyone stared at the golden seal that had fallen to the ground. The seal was squarish and golden in color. There was a divine dragon coiling around the seal, looking extremely lifelike. It was the coiling dragon seal that Su Zimo had obtained from the human sovereign palace. Su Zimo gently waved his hand, and the coiling dragon seal slowly shrank and returned to his palm. Perfected being Song Lang, Sima Ji and all the other perfected beings Jin Dan's eyes turned red as they glared at the small golden seal in Su Zimo's palm, breathing heavily. Once a cultivator reached the nascent soul realm, they would be able to use Dharma artifacts. In other words, to perfected Jin Dan, Khanate spiritual weapons were the best weapons they could use. With a Khanate spiritual weapon, their combat strength would at least double, and they would be able to kill those above their level easily. However, Khanate spiritual weapons were way too rare, and there was no one selling them in the various markets. In the territory of the Great Zhou dynasty, it had been hundreds of years since a Khanate spiritual weapon appeared in the world. Seems like you've benefited quite a bit from the ancient battlefield. Perfected being Song Lang said coldly, "That's good as well. After I kill you, we'll split up your treasures and secret skills. The treasures are in my hands. Let's see if you can live to take them." Su Zimo sneered and held the coiling dragon seal in his left hand. 6 spirit patterns shone in a bedazzling manner, as though he was holding a blazing sun. He swiped his storage bag with his right hand and a gigantic blood-red saber appeared in his palm. The saber trembled and 5 blood mosquitoes shone. A blood beam expanded and a thick blood stench spread. It was the perfect grade spirit weapon blood quencher. "Song Lang, hand over your life." Su Zimo's gaze was burning as he hollered. Holding a seal in his left hand and a saber in his right, he strode towards perfected being Song Lang with a murderous aura. Against hundreds of perfected beings of Jin Dan, Su Zimo advanced instead of retreating. Xian Yi and the others exchanged glances and were invigorated. They swarmed forward and tried their best to help Su Zimo share the pressure. You must have a death wish. A southern mountain sect cultivator wielded a long rod and released his blood chi, smashing it towards Su Zimo's head viciously. Swoosh! Su Zimo channeled his bloodline and the sound of a tsunami could be heard from within his body. Swoosh! Against the incoming rod, Su Zimo did not even look at it and slashed in reverse with his saber, releasing an unparalleled countercurrent force. The southern mountain sect cultivator's pupils constricted violently and his expression changed in shock. Affected by the saber force, the southern mountain sect cultivator's movements slowed down. A flash of blood appeared. The person was sliced into two by blood quencher and his organs and intestines spilled out, emitting a nauseating stench. Shoo! A beam of light streaked through the void and arrived instantly. Without even looking, Su Zimo swung the gigantic seal in reverse and sent the flying sword flying. At the same time, Su Zimo shuddered and slowed down. Even though Xianyi and the others were holding back a portion of the Jindan perfected beings, there were still more than 100 Jindan perfected beings who attacked Su Zimo at the same time. Flying swords and spirit arts danced in the air as runes and resplendent lights surged. Clang! 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 Su Zimo swung the gigantic seal with his left hand and released the sea calming 5 stances with his right, clashing against the incoming flying swords and spirit arts. Thud! 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 Su Zimo retreated continuously and his organs were shaken violently, nearly shifting. Su Zimo spat out a mouthful of blood. Sima Ji roared in laughter. Su Zimo, you're nothing without just now's secret skill. Fufu. Perfected being Songlang sneered. Even if you can kill early-stage Jindan and mid-stage Jindan with the help of a connate spirit weapon, you're still a foundation establishment cultivator at the end of the day. You won't be able to defend against the attacks of late-stage or perfected Jindan cultivators. You think you can kill me with that bit of capabilities of yours? Perfected being Songlang sneered once more. Su Zimo was unmoved. Perfected being Songlang was right. Even if he was at extreme foundation establishment with the augmentation of the coiling dragon seal, he would only be able to fight against mid-stage Jindan in terms of strength. He would not be able to defeat late-stage Jindan cultivators. In just now's attack, there were a few perfected Jindan cultivators attacking. Su Zimo could not withstand it and was injured on the spot. However, Su Zimo was both an immortal and demonic cultivator. Even without his demon form, Su Zimo's physique and bloodline could still suppress all cultivators of the same cultivation realm. Even the perfected Jindan cultivators could not escape death in melee combat against Su Zimo. He was invincible in melee combat. If it was anyone else, the injuries just now suffered would definitely affect their combat strength. However, Su Zimo's physique was way too strong and his regeneration speed was frightening. After consuming a blood chi elixir made from the flesh of dragons in the human emperor's palace, he was at greater mastery of orifice clearing, and was only a step away from condensing a demon core. In just a few breaths, Su Zimo's injuries were mostly healed. Fufufu. Su Zimo laughed and his tendons and bones rang together. Even after he was injured, his aura increased instead of decreasing and his eyes shone with a ferocious glint, resembling an ancient demon that was about to devour humans. Chapter 481. The battle on the Foundation Establishment battlefield had long stopped. The Foundation Establishment cultivators of Blood Crow Palace and the 4 major sects were long scared out of their wits by Su Zimo's methods and did not dare to advance. Clang! 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 Su Zimo waved his hand gently and summoned the 18 flying swords that were streaking across the Foundation Establishment battlefield. They hovered above his head and buzzed. Candlelight sword formation, condense! Su Zimo hollered softly and the 18 flying swords gathered together with their tips pointing outwards, forming a gigantic sword-shaped disc that resembled a blazing sun. 18 streaks of sword chi were released in a bedazzling manner with a threatening sharpness. Kill! With a seal in his left hand and a saber in his right, Su Zimo charged forward once more with the candlelight sword formation hovering above his head. Shoo! 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 One after another, flying swords tore through the air like rain, revealing their sharpness. Spirit arts burst forth and came crashing over in a torrential manner. Su Zimo's expression was calm as usual. With the help of his spirit wings and divine steed fleeting, as well as his spirit perception developed from cultivating the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. His movement techniques were unpredictable. At times he was like a willow leaf, and at other times, he was as fast as lightning. No one could fathom his movements. That body twisted and turned in midair, changing its tendons and shrinking its bones. It could perform many actions that were beyond logic and left one speechless. Like an anaconda, a snake, an ape and a horse, Su Zimo closed the distance between him and the perfected Jin Dan continuously. A late-stage Jin Dan cultivator glared at Su Zimo, who was closing in with widened eyes in disbelief. Was that even human? He truly could not imagine how a human could twist his body to such an extent and dodge such a dense rain of saber lights and arrows while charging over unscathed. He did not have the chance to think anymore. Swoosh! Su Zimo raised his hand and slashed. Countercurrents surged. After reaching extreme foundation establishment, his spirit energy increased exponentially and became denser. Su Zimo could already release saber forces consecutively. The perfected Jin Dan cultivator was shocked and found it difficult to breathe. It was as though a tsunami was crashing over before his eyes and his ears were ringing like thunder. Quick! This person was, after all, a late-stage Jin Dan cultivator. He quickly calmed himself down and adjusted his flying sword, placing it above his head. The Jin Dan began to circulate, and spiritual energy gushed out. No matter what, this foundation establishment cultivator simply couldn't withstand the power of Jin Dan's late stage. As long as he could endure one or two moves, the attacks of the others would descend upon him, and he would inevitably be trapped. Su Zimo smiled faintly as a trace of mockery flashed across his eyes. In his eyes, Taoist Master Jin Dan's moves were full of flaws. Su Zimo's seemingly unstoppable saber suddenly stopped. It was only an inch away from this person's flying sword. Whoosh! Su Zimo moved his wrist and turned the blade. At that moment, Blood Quencher's massive blade turned unusually gentle like ripples on the surface of water. It circled around the flying sword and slid across the man's throat gently. After the extreme hardness, it immediately turned soft. There was almost no sluggishness. It was as smooth as flowing water. The man's eyes dimmed, and a trace of blood appeared on his throat. The next moment, his massive head flew into the air and blood gushed out like a fountain in a blinding scarlet manner. Melee combat was the most dangerous, and a single mistake could lead to death. Su Zimo had fought countless battles ever since he started cultivating and had way too much experience. Although the strength of a late-stage Jin Dan and a perfected Jin Dan was frightening, and could even injure him and threaten his life, even a perfected Jin Dan's body could not compare to his. He played to his strengths and avoided his weaknesses. As long as he closed the distance, even a perfected Jin Dan would not be able to escape death. Yu had once told Su Zimo that demonic cultivators were the easiest to kill someone above their level. That was the logic. After killing that person, Su Zimo did not stop at all. Spinning the coiling dragon seal with his left hand, he circulated the candlelight sword formation, and repelled the incoming flying swords and spirit arts of early-stage and mid-stage Jin Dan. At the same time, he dodged the attacks of late-stage Jin Dan and perfected Jin Dan and fled to the other side. A perfected Jin Dan could not dodge in time and was closed in by Su Zimo. Su Zimo raised the coiling dragon seal and smashed it viciously on the head. Exclamation point! His head shattered and his entire body was smashed into pieces, dying on the spot with fresh blood gushing out. Su Zimo dashed left and right in the crowd, not bothering to fight against late-stage Jin Dan and perfected Jin Dan head-on. Once he missed, he would flee without stopping. Even if dozens of perfected Jin Dan attacked at the same time, they would not be able to trap Su Zimo in the middle. A moment later, Su Zimo only had a few superficial wounds on his body that healed in the blink of an eye. As for Blood Crow Palace, more than 10 perfected Jin Dan had already died. The more they fought, the more shocked everyone became. This person was way too frightening. He had yet to form a Jin Dan and already possessed the ability to kill Jin Dan perfected beings before he formed a Jin Dan. Furthermore, he was not disadvantaged against dozens of perfected Jin Dan perfected beings. Instead, he was vaguely in control of the situation. This person looked like he was in his 20s. How could he possess such frightening combat talent? Kill! Seizing the opportunity, Su Zimo took a few steps forward and arrived before Sima Ji. Raising the coiling dragon seal, he smashed it viciously towards Sima Ji's head. The coiling dragon seal shone with boundless golden light. It suddenly descended, exploding with a thunderous sound. Boom! The gigantic seal descended with a terrifying might. Suddenly, a vicious glint appeared in Sima Ji's eyes as he said coldly, "I've been waiting for you for a long time." Swoosh! When Sima Ji channeled Jin Dan to its limits, a phenomenon appeared behind him. A blazing fire that was dozens of feet tall emitted a scorching temperature, and engulfed Su Zimo rapidly like a prairie fire. It was the Jin Dan phenomenon. The reason why Sima Ji had endured for so long was because he wanted to use this Jin Dan phenomenon to kill Su Zimo completely. Su Zimo did not dodge at all. His bloodline rumbled and supported the coiling dragon seal that shone brightly as though it was a blazing sun, pressing down fiercely. "You must have a death wish." Sima Ji hollered and the Jin Dan phenomenon shone brightly. Boom! The coiling dragon seal collided with the power of the Jin Dan phenomenon, and a deafening sound was released with a wanton might. The moment they collided, the momentum of the flames was suppressed by the coiling dragon seal. Despite being so close to the sea of flames, Su Zimo endured the surging flames and grit his teeth. He merely channeled his bloodline and spirit energy to exert pressure continuously. Both sides were wrestling. The coiling dragon seal was merely an inch away from Sima Ji's head. However, it was obstructed by the power of the Jin Dan phenomenon and could not press down anymore. After a brief pause, the gigantic flames howled over and devoured Su Zimo's entire arm. Crackling sounds could be heard. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo's arm was charred and his flesh exploded in a horrifying manner. Su Zimo sighed internally and retreated. It was no wonder why the Jin Dan phenomenon was perfected Jin Dan's strongest attack. Even with his Khanate spirit weapon coupled with his torrential bloodline, he could not break through Jin Dan's phenomenon. Su Zimo's figure flashed rapidly, and he escaped from the attacks of many perfected Jin Dan. His arm was still burning with flames and was already a bloody mess. There was no way to purge the power of the Jin Dan phenomenon without extreme methods. "Haha!" Sima Ji roared in laughter. "Su Zimo, that arm of yours is already crippled." "Not necessarily." Su Zimo harumphed coldly and took a deep breath of air. The spirit sea in his dantian rumbled and his bloodline surged, flowing through his limbs towards his injured arm. There was a sizzling sound. The flames were extinguished and green smoke billowed. Many cultivators watched with widened eyes. The next moment, an even more frightening scene happened. The rotting flesh on Su Zimo's arm fell off gradually and tender flesh started to grow, shimmering with a crystalline luster. There was an uproar. When she saw the emperor's silence as though he was deep in his memories, she could not help but ask, "Father, what are you hesitating for? If you can't make up your mind, why don't you send a message to the Patriarch of Great Zhou and let him decide?" The emperor snapped out of his trance and shook his head, replying with certainty, "The Patriarch will definitely not agree to it. How would we know if we don't try?" Ji Yaoshua looked at the emperor unblinkingly. The emperor could clearly sense the worry and urgency in Ji Yaoshua's heart. However, she was trying her best to suppress it and did not offend him with her words. The emperor sighed internally. In reality, the one who resembled him the most among the younger generation and had the aura of an emperor was not the princess, but his daughter. However, Ji Yaoshua was a woman and could not inherit the throne. "I admit that Su Zimo is at extreme foundation establishment and the second human emperor. He's an unprecedented paragon with an unfathomable future." However, the emperor changed the topic and said in a deep voice, "Su Zimo is about to die. How can he achieve anything without a future? This time round Misty Peak and Su Zimo are doomed. I can't think of any way for Misty Peak to break out of this situation." Ji Yaoshua said in a huff, "Nothing is absolute." The emperor said in a deep voice, If Su Zimo can survive this calamity, then..." The emperor did not continue and merely raised his head to look deeply at Ji Yaoshua. At that moment the emperor made a decision. If Su Zimo could survive this calamity, he would go against everyone's wishes and pass the throne to Ji Yaoshua. On the other side of the forest. "There's no chance," Gushi shook her head. "That person isn't here. Misty Peak is done for." "Auntie Gu, is there any other way to save him?" Demoness Ji frowned. I'm at late-stage nascent soul and I can at most stabilize the nascent soul battlefield. However, that old ferocious beast of Misty Peak above the clouds can no longer hold on. Wuxia said regretfully. It's a pity that Su Zimo, the second person in history to reach extreme foundation establishment, is going to die before he can mature. Demoness Ji's eyes dimmed. Wuxia sighed. The calamity 10,000 years ago left a deep impression on the cultivation world. For the sake of Misty Peak, no cultivator or sect would be willing to offend a great enemy like the witch race. Beneath Misty Peak, blood flowed like rivers and corpses piled into mountains. On the battlefield of Jindan, Su Zimo made use of his strong physique and terrifying movement techniques to ensure that he was not defeated. However, on the battlefield of nascent souls, Misty Peak was completely defeated. More than half of the 100-odd Jining Zhenjuan were dead. The remaining Jining Zhenjuan were severely injured as well, and could only barely defend as they retreated. It was only a matter of time before Misty Peak was completely wiped out. Above the clouds, the old immortal crane's situation was even worse. The old immortal crane did not have much lifespan to begin with. If she could not advance any further, she would only be able to last for a few more decades even without this calamity. Although her true form was a Bai Fong, an ancient pure-blooded ferocious bird, she was already old and her combat strength was not even half of her peak. She was fighting against 5 void reversions and one of them was even from the witch race. By now, the old immortal crane was already at the end of her rope. She was covered in injuries and her eyes were dim. Countless feathers fell and the flames burning on her body were gradually extinguished as well. Waving his bone staff, the palace lord shot out a blood arrow with a torrential evil aura. Exclamation point. The old immortal crane could not dodge in time and a bloody hole the size of an arm appeared on her wing. The wound sizzled and corroded the flesh around it, emitting a pungent stench. The old immortal crane grunted dully. The next moment, the attacks of the other 4 void reversions landed on the old immortal crane. Poof! Poof! 2 more wounds appeared on her body and blood gushed out. The old immortal crane's body almost exploded and one of her legs was snapped. It was a tragic sight and she was on the verge of collapsing. Ever since the ancestral master of Misty Peak passed away, the old immortal crane had guarded Misty Peak for thousands of years. She had truly given everything she had and fought till the very end without backing down. Everyone from Misty Peak was devastated when they saw that. Senior Crane, Patriarch, Ling Yun and the others cried out tragically. The outcome of the battle was set. Once the old immortal crane died, the other cultivators of Misty Peak would be fish on the chopping block. Fufufu. The palace lord sneered, "Old beast, I've said that I'm going to slaughter everyone from Misty Peak today. Not a single soul will be spared." Chapter 483. Leave no one alive? Right then, another voice sounded from above the clouds. It was deep and hoarse, neither loud nor soft. However, everyone present could hear it clearly. Who would dare to appear at this moment? Many cultivators looked over instinctively. From the horizon, a man in black robes strode over in an unhurried manner. Initially, he was merely a blurry figure. However, in the blink of an eye, he arrived before them. Everyone on the battlefield was shocked. That person's footsteps were clearly slow, as though he was taking a stroll. However, he arrived before them in an instant, creating a strong visual impact. Everyone could only see him clearly now that he was closer. That person's black hair draped over his shoulders like a waterfall. His expression was cold and his face was sharp as a knife, emitting a cold aura. For some unknown reason, ever since the black-robed man appeared, everyone on the battlefield, including the 5 void reversions above the clouds, felt a sense of trepidation. There was no reason for it. They felt fear and trepidation at the sight of that person. Be it the Jindan, Nascent Soul or Void Reversion battlefields, all the cultivators stopped what they were doing and looked over instinctively. When the old immortal crane saw who it was, she sighed gently with a conflicted expression. It was clear from the old immortal crane's tone that she knew this person. Everyone from Misty Peak, even the patriarch Ling Yun, was confused. It's him. Suddenly, one of the dozens of remaining Jining Zhenjuan from Misty Peak had a head full of white hair and was clearly in his twilight years. He glared at the black-robed man with murky eyes and exclaimed, he's back. The nascent soul old man trembled emotionally. Little E, you have 3 more years to live. The black-robed man's gaze shifted to the nascent soul old man and he said calmly, Little E? Su Zimo and the other junior cultivators were confused. However, the patriarch Ling Yun, Xian Yi and the others shuddered. The nascent soul old man's name was Ning Yi. Apart from the old immortal crane, he was the oldest Grand Elder in Misty Peak and had lived for more than 1,000 years. A Jindan realm, one had a lifespan of 500 years. The nascent soul realm had 1,000 years. Only after reaching the return to void stage would one have a lifespan of 5,000 years. All of the cultivators of the same generation as this nascent soul cultivator had already perished, leaving him as the only one left. This dark-robed man before him had addressed Supreme Elder Ning Yi as Little E. Didn't this mean that this person's status was even higher than Supreme Elder Ning Yi? The black-robed man should be someone from 1,000 years ago. That was why Ling Yun and the other juniors did not recognize him. Ling Yun's heart skipped a beat when he saw the old immortal crane and Grand Elder Ning Yi's reactions, as though he had thought of something. Could it be him? Xian Yi and the other perfected Jindan sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at each other. They had already guessed. Outside Misty Peak, when Ji Yaoshua saw this person, she was confused. She turned her head and asked, Imperial Father, who is this person? He seems to be related to Misty Peak, but he also seems to have a strong background. No, I don't. The Emperor shook his head. Suddenly, the Emperor's heart skipped a beat as he thought of someone. It was someone he had never seen before, and had only heard of in legends. The Emperor murmured, perhaps he's the only one who would be fearless against the witch race. On the other side, when they saw the black-robed man appear, Gu Shi and Ji Yaoshua heaved a sigh of relief. Ji Yaoshua clapped her hands and chuckled. That senior has finally appeared. Gu Shi said, with him around, there's no need to worry about the void reversion battlefield. I'll stabilize the nascent soul battlefield and we should be able to get through this calamity. My father is watching over there, so I won't be going, Demoness Ji blinked. Gu Shi nodded and withdrew a mask from her storage bag. Wiping her face, she transformed into a different person in the blink of an eye and headed towards the battlefield. Far away in the depths of the capital of Great Zhou, an old man sensed something and suddenly opened his eyes. His glabella shone brightly and a palm-sized glowing figure flew out. His essence spirit had left his body. The glowing figure emitted a mysterious energy fluctuation. His spirit consciousness spread out. A moment later, the glowing figure returned to the old man's glabella and vanished. The old man heaved a long sigh of relief and murmured, to think that he's back. It's no wonder why he was the #1 paragon of Great Zhou back then. After not seeing him for 1,000 years, he has already cultivated to this point. In the skies above Misty Peak, the black-robed man surveyed his surroundings and looked at the corpses strewn across the ground. However, his expression did not change at all as he remarked indifferently, Misty Peak hasn't been so lively in a long time. When they heard that, Xian Yi and the others were even more certain of this person's identity. Su Zimo frowned internally. No matter how he looked at it, this black-robed man seemed to have a close relationship with Misty Peak, and seemed to be a cultivator of Misty Peak in the past. However, Su Zimo could not sense any emotions from this person. Even when he saw so many Misty Peak cultivators die and their corpses piled up into mountains, this person did not react at all. Cold-blooded and heartless. That was the first impression that the black-robed man gave Su Zimo. 1,000 years ago, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat and a thought flashed through his mind as he recalled a person. The first time he heard of this person was through the disheveled old man. Thereafter, he heard Senior Crane mention a few more things in Thunderclap Valley. This person was the owner of the mystic gold silk armor. In the north region of Tianhuang mainland, he was invincible in the Foundation establishment in Jindan realms and no one could stand against him. When this person joined Ethereal Peak, the method he used to clear the 8 distresses formation was to kill everyone he saw within. This person was cold and heartless and was extreme in his actions. The moment he showed signs of turning into a fiend, he was locked in Thunderclap Valley to reflect on his mistakes. This was the person who obtained the Void Thunder Manual in the ancient battlefield, and left it in the mystic gold silk armor for a fated person. Later on, this person turned into a fiend and betrayed the sect. He was a terrifying expert from 1,000 years ago. Now he was back once more. Above the clouds, the 5 void reversions, including Blood Crow Palace's lord, had grim expressions as they sized up the black-robed man. The 5 of them could sense a dangerous aura from this person. A moment later, Iridescent Cloud's Palace's Dao Being Jingming narrowed his eyes and cupped his fists. May I know your name, fellow Taoist? Which sect or faction are you from, and why are you interfering in this matter? The black-robed man shifted his gaze towards Dao Being Jingming and said slowly, Are you even worthy of knowing my name? Before he finished his sentence, the black-robed man's glabella shone brightly and a beam of blood light burst forth. A terrifying aura exploded all of a sudden. Blood Crow Palace's lord and the others were shocked and retreated one after another. Poof! Immediately after, in front of countless gazes, Dao Being Jingming's head exploded like a watermelon and he died on the spot. Even his essence spirit could not escape. He was dead. A void reversion expert was dead just like that. The entire Misty Peak was dead silent. This was a truly ruthless person who was decisive in killing. The black-robed man felt nothing after killing a void reversion. He looked at the other 4 expressionlessly with a frosty gaze. Chapter 484. The death of Iridescent Cloud's Palace's Dao Being Jingming shocked the remaining 4 void reversions and their hair stood on end. Blood Crow Palace's lord's expression turned extremely terrible as he glared at the black-robed man with a dark gaze that shone with a faint green light. It was extremely difficult for one to die at the void reversion realm. Although nascent souls cultivated essence spirits, their essence spirits were in a turbid state and were extremely fragile. Without any protection, an essence spirit that left the body was akin to an infant in the middle of a forest in the vast wilderness. It could die at any moment. If a gust of wind blew, or if one was exposed to the scorching sun, even the slightest movement would harm one's primordial spirit. If the essence spirit encountered an astral wind or malevolent aura, it would be destroyed instantly. The death of the essence spirit was a true death. It was useless even if the body was perfectly preserved. However, things were different at the void reversion realm. Nascent souls comprehended heaven and earth, and used visualization techniques to cultivate their essence spirits continuously. Once they refined away the impurities within their essence spirits and obtained a bit of pure yang spirit, they would advance to the void reversion realm. In the cultivation world, there was a saying about returning one's spirit to the void. That was what it meant. The essence spirit of the void reversion realm was the same as the cultivator's true body, and was flawless. It did not fear the scorching sun, torrential rain or astral winds and malevolent auras. It could truly break free from the shackles of the physical body, and roam the world with its spirit. At that point, the essence spirit was equivalent to the external incarnation of the cultivator. In the cultivation world, there was another term, transcendence. Transcendence referred to the essence spirit leaving the body. Transcendence referred to the essence spirit being equivalent to an external incarnation. In the ancient era, the void reversion realm was also known as the spirit transformation realm. Even if a void reversion's physical body was destroyed, they would be able to escape with their essence spirit as long as they reacted quickly enough. Although their physical body was destroyed, their essence spirit was still around and it was equivalent to preserving their lives. With a single thought, the black-robed man killed a void reversion and the latter's essence spirit was destroyed on the spot before it could escape. At that moment, Blood Crow Palace's lord and the other 3 were shocked and could not help but feel a trace of fear. The black-robed man glanced sideways at the old immortal crane that was battered and covered in wounds not far away. Reaching out, he swiped his storage bag. A pill the size of a longan appeared. Several patterns appeared on its surface and it emitted a rich medicinal fragrance. This is Dao Being Liao Yuan of True Fire Sect narrowed his eyes with a bewildered expression. Life and Death Reflection Pill. The Blood Crow Palace Lord enunciated each and every word clearly. Before anyone else could react, Jining Zhenjuan and the Void Reversion cultivators shuddered. Dao Being Liao Yuan and the others glared at the elixir in the hands of the black-robed man with burning gazes, wanting nothing more than to devour his palm. The Life and Death Reflection Pill was a level 5 spirit pill created by the Pill Emperor of the ancient era. It was derived from the meaning of the final radiance of the setting sun. No matter how severely injured a void reversion was, as long as they were not dead, there was a certain chance that they would be rejuvenated and recover from their injuries after consuming the life and death reversion elixir. The life and death reflection pill had long been lost in Tianhuang mainland. This was equivalent to a cultivator having a second life. With a single thought, the black-robed man sent the life and death reflection elixir to the old immortal crane. The eyes of Taoist Liuan and the others turned red. To think that such a precious elixir would be given away just like that. A few of them revealed looks of jealousy and a ferocious glint flashed in their eyes. They even had thoughts of snatching it. The old immortal crane had a conflicted expression, and did not receive it immediately. The Blood Crow Palace Lord sneered. That old beast's lifespan is almost up and she's on the brink of death. Even if she recovers from her injuries, she won't be able to live for long. The life and death reflection elixir had a chance of recovering from injuries, but it could not replenish one's lifespan. That was also the reason why the old immortal crane did not receive the elixir. The life and death reflection elixir was way too precious and it would be a waste to give it to her. I won't take back what I've given away, the black-robed man said indifferently. You don't have to worry about anything. The reason why I'm giving you this elixir is to sever karma and resolve it. But, the old immortal crane sighed gently. The life and death reflection elixir is way too precious and rare. You're a void reversion and need it as well. I don't need it because nobody can injure me severely. The black-robed man's tone was calm without any fluctuations, as though he was stating something that was only natural. Instantly, everyone went silent. It was as though everyone was stunned by the aura that the black-robed man inadvertently revealed in his words. The black-robed man looked at the old immortal crane and continued, "You still have a sliver of hope." The old immortal crane could understand what the black-robed man meant. That sliver of hope was for her to recover from her injuries after consuming the life and death reflection elixir, and make use of this battle to advance in her cultivation realm. As long as she took that step forward, her lifespan would increase exponentially, and she would be able to break free from her lifespan crisis completely. As for Misty Peak, a pure-blooded ferocious bird at the Dharma characteristic realm would be born as well. Little Crane called out softly with a concerned expression, urging him repeatedly. The patriarch, Ling Yun, Su Zimo and the others looked at the old immortal crane as well, hoping that she could make use of this opportunity to undergo a nirvanic rebirth. The old immortal crane took a deep breath of air and nodded, taking the life and death reflection elixir and swallowing it. The elixir melted the moment it entered her mouth and a rich life force burst forth, forming a tornado that swept through her limbs and flowed through every single corner of her body. The old immortal crane's injuries were healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. When they saw that, Su Zimo and the others were delighted. If the old immortal crane could advance further, it would be a blessing in disguise. Although Misty Peak was severely injured after this calamity, they had a pure-blooded ferocious bird at the Dharma characteristic realm. In terms of strength, they were definitely the strongest of the 5 major sects and their rise was imminent. The black-robed man's gaze shifted and landed on Blood Crow Palace's lord and the others once more. I know who you are. The palace lord harumphed coldly. There aren't many void reversions who possess such combat strength. You should be the titular disciple of Shura sect of the Fiend sects, the Shura of this generation. The black-robed man was expressionless. To think that the Shura that's famous for its massacre would cross the North region to meddle in other people's business, fufu. The palace lord sneered. The black-robed man remained silent and his expression did not change. Gripping his fists, the palace lord suppressed the killing intent in his heart and said in a deep voice, Shura, since you want to interfere in this matter, I can take a step back. However, I have to take this person away. Extending his arm, the palace lord pointed to Su Zimo who was below Misty Peak. Everyone from Misty Peak felt their hearts sink and knew that things were bad. It was already surprising that the black-robed man could step in to protect Misty Peak. However, he had never met Su Zimo before. How could he offend someone of the witch race for a Foundation establishment cultivator? The black-robed man's gaze shifted to Su Zimo. For some unknown reason, Su Zimo felt a strange sensation in his heart. The black-robed man's gaze was extremely strange, as though he was looking at his successor. After pausing for a moment, the black-robed man finally spoke with a single word. No. Everyone was stunned. None of them expected that the black-robed man would offend someone of the witch race for a Foundation establishment cultivator. Furthermore, he rejected it so decisively. Chapter 485. Shura, you should know where I'm from. Let's both take a step back. The palace lord's gaze was dark as he said coolly, I merely want to take this Foundation establishment lad away. This has nothing to do with you. If you continue to force me. Before the Blood Crow Palace's palace lord could finish, the black-robed man cut him off with an impatient look. What can you do if I insist on forcing you? Everyone was in an uproar. He was way too domineering. He did not give the other party any leeway at all. Truly, it's better to meet him in person than to hear about him. It's no wonder why he was invincible at the Foundation establishment in Jindan realm back in the north region of Tianhuang mainland. He's way too sharp, Xianyi lamented. The disheveled old man sighed. Even the great Zhou dynasty doesn't dare to step in, but this person has no qualms. He's truly amazing. It's a pity that this person has degenerated into a fiend. Otherwise, Lu Hui did not continue, but the meaning behind her words was clear. Up till this point of his cultivation, Su Zimo was no longer as repulsed by the fiend sects as he was initially. Iridescent Clouds Palace, Southern Mountains sect, True Fire sect and Azure Frost sect were all considered as righteous sects that were beneath the immortal sects and took it upon themselves to slay demons and fiends. But now that Misty Peak was in trouble, those sects chose to take advantage of the situation and hit them while they were down. How were their actions any different from fiends? The black-robed man was someone from the Shura sect of the fiend sections. But now that he knew that Misty Peak was in trouble, he had traveled thousands of miles across the middle continent and north region to rush over. Who was the immortal and who was the fiend? Su Zimo agreed with Demoness Ji's words more and more. The fiend Dao was not an unpardonable Dao. Instead, it was a Dao of bigotry and extremes. Right then, the disheveled old man asked, the sect has already cut off contact with this person. Who can inform him? That's right, Xianyi exclaimed softly. I heard that the Shura sect is located in the middle continent of Tianhuang mainland and is billions of miles away from Misty Peak. Even a void reversion would need close to a year to reach there at full speed. How did this person arrive in time? Patriarch Lingyun was also confused. Didn't this mean that a year ago, someone had already found the black-robed man and passed on the news that Misty Peak might be facing a calamity? Lingyun was sure that no one in Misty Peak, including the old immortal Crane, could contact the black-robed man. Then who was it that passed the news to the black-robed man? Su Zimo was a little puzzled as he listened to the discussions of the chiefs. At this moment, a gaze fell on him and lingered for a moment. Su Zimo sensed something and subconsciously looked up. A woman in a gauze gown had appeared in the air at some point. She was not a cultivator from Misty Peak. Her appearance was ordinary, but her figure was slender and curvaceous. Just one look at her was enough to arouse lust. Su Zimo had never seen this woman before. However, for some reason, a sense of déjà vu surfaced in his heart. Su Zimo was deep in thought. Above the clouds, the black-robed man was domineering. Instantly, the palace lord's expression turned extremely terrible. Right now there was no way for him to back down. The palace lord said coldly, Shura, although you're a titled successor of the fiend sects, we're all at void reversion realm and I'm even from the witch race. I'm not afraid of you. That's right. True Fire sect's Dao being Liao Yuan said in a deep voice. We still have 4 void reversions. Fellow Daoists, don't go overboard. Dao being Lao Yang of Southern Mountain sect and Dao being Han Ming of Azure Frost sect glared at the black-robed man with tense expressions, prepared to strike at any moment. Aren't you leaving? Initially, the black-robed man's head was lowered. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and said. Although his words were random and baffling, the palace lord and the other 3 felt chills run down their spines as their pupils constricted. The black-robed man raised his head with an indifferent gaze. Very well, don't leave then. All of you can stay. Before he finished his sentence, the black-robed man's glabella shone brightly and released his killing move once more. Shura did not open his eyes, but the moment he did, he wanted to kill. Instantly the world changed color. The black-robed man did not move at all and merely shone with a blood-colored light on his glabella. Instantly, a sea of blood appeared in the void and surged towards the 4 people of Blood Crow Palace with a pungent stench. This method had already surpassed the knowledge of Su Zimo and the other perfected beings Jin Dan. This seemed to be a battle between essence spirits. A faint green light shone from the palace lord's glabella and formed a gigantic skull in midair that was frighteningly menacing. The skull opened its bloodied mouth and gulped down the sea of blood in large mouthfuls, as though it wanted to devour the entire sea of blood. At the same time, Dao Bing Liao Yuan, Dao Bing Lao Yang and Han Ming attacked at the same time. Their glabellas shone with a resplendent light as they released their spirit consciousnesses and conjured many phenomenons. Swoosh! A gigantic fireball that resembled a blazing sun charged towards the sea of blood before them. Boom! A mountain peak formed and crashed down, wanting to suppress the raging waves of the sea of blood completely. Swash! Snow drifted for thousands of miles and everything was frozen. Layers of ice formed on the surface of the sea of blood. It was a spirit consciousness attack. It was a killing move that could only be used by those at the void reversion realm, using spirit consciousnesses to conjure all sorts of phenomenons that seemed tangible but were incorporeal, attacking the other party's essence spirit directly. As for the other party, they could only defend against it with their spirit consciousnesses. A fight between essence spirits was extremely dangerous, and any mistake could result in death. Previously, perfected being Jing Ming of Iridescent Cloud's palace was killed by a spirit consciousness attack from the black-robed man, causing his head to explode and his essence spirit to be destroyed. Kill! Right now, the black-robed man was fearless against the 4 of them. He growled deeply and his eyes shone with a ferocious glint as he exuded a shuddering killing intent. The gigantic skull in midair started to devour the sea of blood at a slower speed and trembled continuously. Crack! 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 A series of cracks had already appeared on the surface of the skull. The palace lord's expression changed. At the same time, a shuddering roar sounded from the depths of the sea of blood. Bang! 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 Suddenly, the ice on the surface of the sea of blood exploded. One after another, corpses with terrifying auras swung their fists and broke through the ice, leaping out of the sea and roaring from the depths of their throats as they floated in the sea of blood. A mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. When they saw that, all the cultivators near Misty Peak, be it friend or foe, were scared out of their wits. His methods were truly earth-shaking and even ghosts and gods were afraid of him. The sea of blood rumbled with raging waves that howled, wanting to drown the world. Taoist Han Ming sucked in a cold breath. Xing! The sea of blood drowned the fireball in midair, and the flames were extinguished instantly. Perfected being Liao Yuan's body swayed and blood drained from his face. Within his glabella consciousness, an essence spirit that was identical to him and burned with fine flames dimmed as well, and the flames on its body were extinguished. Perfected being Liao Yuan's life force diminished and he fell from midair. He was dead. Even though the black-robed man was fighting against 4, he managed to kill one of the void reversions. Boom! The towering mountain peak in the sea of blood let out a series of deafening booms against the impact of the corpses. Before long, the mountain peak collapsed and was drowned by the sea of blood. At the same time, Dao Bing Lao Yang's essence spirit shattered within his consciousness. Dao Bing Lao Yang was devoured by the sea of blood and turned into a corpse. Another void reversion was dead. Chapter 486. Right as the 5 void reversions were fighting above the clouds, the nascent souls were fighting as well. Both sides were in a frenzy. Go and kill that Su Zimo, the faster the better. Realizing that the situation was amiss, the Blood Crow King did not dare to be careless and ordered the 10 Jining Zhenjuan to do it. Blood Crow Palace still had the absolute advantage in terms of numbers and strength of the Jining Zhenjuan. The Jining Zhenjuan of Misty Peak was left with only a few dozen people led by the Patriarch and Ling Yun. All of them were covered in injuries and exhausted. They could barely fight anymore. The Blood Crow King reverted to his true form, a pitch-black crow with blood-red eyes. Leading the remaining Jining Zhenjuan, he launched a ferocious attack towards Ling Yun and the others. Ling Yun and the others had no time to spare, and could only watch as the 10 Jining Zhenjuan charged towards Su Zimo. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. No matter how strong his methods were or how many trump cards he had, there was no way he could defend against the strength of the Jining Jinjuan. At nascent soul realm, cultivating an essence spirit meant that one could release dermic arts and utilize the powers of heaven and earth. Even the most ordinary of dermic arts was enough to kill Su Zimo, who was at foundation establishment realm with ease. The Ten Jining Jinjuan charged over and conjured hand seals in midair. A terrifying energy fluctuation spread through the voids. Su Zimo did not dare to be careless as he spread his spirit wings and chanted a sutra in his heart. He was prepared to release a secret skill of the fiend sex, blood escape, to escape 1,000 miles away. Su Zimo had a clear view of the situation. The black-robed man's strength was terrifying and extremely domineering. As long as he could hold on for a while longer, Blood Crow Palace would definitely be defeated by the time the dust settled on the Void Reversion battlefield. All of a sudden, a beautiful figure appeared before Su Zimo. It's her? Su Zimo frowned slightly. The person in front of him was the flirtatious woman who appeared later on. You must have a death wish. You're courting death. The Ten Jining Jinjuan who had rushed over roared angrily and began to cast spells in their hands. There were multicolored swords with sharp edges, crystalline fingers that were as thick as stone pillars, terrifying fists that were as heavy as mountains. Spells filled the skies and surged over, almost drowning the gauze-gowned woman and Su Zimo. The gauze-gowned woman's expression did not change, and a trace of mockery flashed past her eyes. Suddenly, the woman in the gauze gown revealed a smile. Her eyes were suffused with a trace of extraordinary splendor, which was bewitching and charming. The woman in the gauze gown had an ordinary appearance, but when she smiled, it was as if the sun, moon, and stars had all lost their color. Light flowed in her eyes, rippling like water, causing one's heart to palpitate. In the blink of an eye, all the spells vanished. Seeing this scene, all the cultivators were shocked by the gauze-gowned woman's methods. Su Zimo muttered to himself for a moment before he vaguely guessed the identity of the woman in the gauze gown. Cultivators of the fiend sex pure maiden sect were probably the only ones capable of bewitching the world with a single frown and smile. That woman was definitely not Demoness G, but she must have a close relationship with her. Considering this person's cultivation realm, it didn't take long for him to figure out her identity. She was the chief steward of Sky Treasure Auction House, Gu Shi. Using the secret skill of Pure Maiden Sect, Gu Shi silently dispelled many dermic spells. Taking advantage of the moment when the Ten Jining Jinjuan were distracted, she raised her palm. The entire misty peak was silent and one could hear a pin drop. It was as though everyone was stunned by the black-robed man's aura and kept quiet out of fear. Admit his mistake. Swear. It was useless. Even if he wanted to leave now, he wouldn't be able to. Dao Bing Hanming seemed to be frightened as well as he said with a trembling voice, What do you mean by that? I've already admitted my mistake. Dao Bing Hanming was already incoherent. Cut the crap. Hand over your life. The black-robed man tapped his glabella with his finger. His glabella shone with a bright light, forming a blood sea vortex. The black-robed man reached out and pulled out a saber from the blood sea vortex. Initially, it was small, but by the time he pulled it out completely, it had already expanded with a torrential killing intent. There were streaks of blood on the saber. The black-robed man flicked his wrist and the saber trembled. The streaks of blood bulged slightly, resembling blood vessels as the stench of blood filled the air. He's using a saber? When he saw the black-robed man pull out the saber, Su Zimo was stunned for a moment as a thought flashed through his mind. Before he could think about it, his attention was attracted by the black-robed man's terrifying methods. Taking a step forward, the black-robed man flipped his hand and swung his saber in a simple manner, enveloping Dao Bing Hanming and sealing off all his escape routes. Don't go overboard. Dao Bing Hanming shrieked and tapped his glabella, summoning a flying sword that shone with a cold light. At the same time, he withdrew a defensive shield from his storage bag and injected dermic powers into it. The shield expanded against the wind and hovered above his head. Chapter 487. Clang. The saber struck the flying sword and sliced it into two. Dao Bing Hanming spat out a huge mouthful of blood. The flying sword was his destiny dermic weapon, and was connected to his essence spirit. With his destiny dermic weapon destroyed, Dao Being Hanming's essence spirit was severely injured as though it was struck by lightning. However, the black-robed man's saber technique was still sharp and did not stop. It struck the shield in midair heavily, and let out a deafening sound of metal clashing. Boom! The shield exploded into a pile of shards. A terrifying power surged into Dao Being Hanming's body like a sharp blade, slicing his organs, bloodline and bones into pieces. Poof! 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 Blood mists exploded on the surface of Dao Being Hanming's body. A single slash was enough to sever Dao Being Hanming's life force completely. A tiny glowing person scurried out of Dao Being Hanming's head in a panic. His essence spirit left his body and fled into the distance. Unfortunately, the two of them were extremely close and Dao Being Hanming's essence spirit did not manage to escape far before the black-robed man caught up and crushed it. Without the protection of the physical body, the essence spirit was way too weak and could not withstand a single blow. In the blink of an eye, all the void reversions of the four major sects were killed by the black-robed man, leaving only the palace lord. The palace lord had just conjured a dermic art when Dao Being Hanming was already dead. The Blood Crow Palace's lord grit his teeth and waved the bone staff in his hands. He muttered a series of obscure words. The skull at the top of the bone staff gradually filled with blood as though it was alive and the sockets of its eyes shone with a scarlet blood glow. Bloodbats condense! The palace lord hollered and pointed his bone staff towards the black-robed man from afar. Buzz! 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 The skull on the bone staff opened its mouth and blood-colored bats swarmed out one after another like locusts. They were endless and swarmed towards the black-robed man. That was a secret skill of the witch race. Every single one of them was a bloodthirsty bat. As long as one was surrounded by a blood bat, it would only take an instant for them to suck the blood of a cultivator dry. How dare a firefly compete with the radiance of the moon? The black-robed man sneered. Facing the bloodbats that blotted out the sky, he did not retreat or dodge. Instead, he took a step forward and slashed out with his saber once again. The weather changed. This saber seemed to have slashed out an endless purgatory. Heaven and earth collapsed. An endless rain of fire fell from the sky. The ground cracked open and crimson-red lava gushed out. The vast land was filled with desolation, and corpses were everywhere. The bloodbats that filled the sky charged into the Avicii purgatory, wailing incessantly. Before they could get close, they had already turned into nothingness. A look of panic flashed through the palace lord's eyes. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, the black-robed man had already arrived before the palace lord. The black-robed man swung his blade with a backhand motion at an extremely swift speed. The blade tore through space and emitted a wave of ghastly wails and howls that shook the heart. The palace lord's heart skipped a beat. Without any time to think, he could only raise the bone staff in his hand to receive the blow. Creak! The blade slashed across the bone staff, producing an ear-piercing sound that made one's teeth ache. A faint mark was left on the bone staff. The palace lord shuddered and a mouthful of blood surged up his throat before he swallowed it down forcefully. Although the witch race was one of the primordial 9 races, their physiques were not strong and the techniques they specialized in were not melee combat. With a single slash, the palace lord was already severely injured. Each time he breathed, he could feel the moist stench of blood and the pain of his lungs being ripped apart. This was proof that his organs were injured. If he continued fighting, there was a high chance that he would suffer from an unrecoverable injury. The palace lord retreated explosively and waved his bone staff, setting up a series of ghastly green barriers in front of him. The black-robed man ignored them and barged through forcefully. Crack! 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 The ghastly green barriers shattered repeatedly, unable to stop the black-robed man in his tracks. The black-robed man's gaze was cold and his killing intent was chilling, following him like a shadow. Sensing the black-robed man's killing intent, the palace lord finally panicked. Widening his eyes, he hollered, "Shura, I'm from the witch race. If you dare to take my life, Shura sect will be destroyed." When he heard that, Suzima was secretly alarmed. The palace lord's tone was forceful and filled with confidence, as though he was hinting at something. Could there truly be a super sect in Tianhuang mainland that was destroyed by the primordial 9 races? You think that a remnant of the witch race like you can threaten me? The black-robed man's gaze was cold as he strode forward and slashed at the palace lord once more. Clang! The palace lord barely managed to defend against it. Unable to hold it in any longer, he spat out a huge mouthful of blood and his organs shifted, almost shattering. The words remnant of the witch race caused quite a stir in the crowd. In the cultivation world, ferocious beasts with impure bloodlines were known as remnant beasts. In that case, the palace lord was not completely considered as a member of the witch race and could only be considered half of it. Suddenly, Su Zimo recalled that back in the primordial ruin, the divine dragon had said something similar as well, berating the palace lord for being a bastard with an impure bloodline. After being exposed by the black-robed man, the palace lord's expression turned extremely terrible with a steely expression. The black-robed man remarked coldly, "Even if a true witch was here, I would dare to kill you, let alone a remnant of the witch race. There's no one in this world that I, Yin Beichen, don't dare to kill." It was only at this moment that Su Zimo found out that this terrifying expert from 1,000 years ago was Yin Beichen. The palace lord did not dare to linger as he bit his tongue gently and spat out a stream of essence blood, releasing a secret skill. Turning into a streak of light, he fled into the distance at an extremely fast speed. "Where do you think you're going?" Yin Beichen's eyes lit up and shone with a dark glint. Slashing with his saber, it seemed to cross the void and slashed heavily on the palace lord's body. There was no way to dodge. Exclamation point. A pillar of blood spewed out. Blood Crow Palace's lord's body was sliced into two. The essence spirit of the palace lord left his body and floated in midair. It was a tiny person that shone with a faint blood light and looked exactly the same as his main body. Blood sacrifice. The essence spirit of the Blood Crow Palace's palace lord escaped and released a spirit consciousness fluctuation. The essence spirit passed by one village after another, and there were many innocent mortals below. There were farmers plowing the fields, burly men chopping firewood, women preparing meals and children playing around. As though they were enveloped by some sort of power, those living beings were motionless. In the blink of an eye, their bodies withered rapidly and turned into streaks of blood light. Streams of life force essence surged into the fleeing essence spirit in midair. The palace lord's essence spirit shone with a bright blood light and recovered rapidly. Everyone from Misty Peak was enraged at the sight of that. Hundreds of thousands of innocent mortals met with a calamity and turned into dried corpses in a tragic manner. It was exactly the same as what Su Zimo and the others saw in Linfeng City back then. Yin Beichen chased after him with his saber, striding through the voids in huge strides. Unfortunately, the distance between the two of them increased. Although void reversions had lost their bodies and only had essence spirits left, their combat strength was reduced. Their speed was at least twice as fast as before without the restraints of their bodies. Furthermore, the palace lord had used the evil art of blood sacrifice to replenish his massive energy, and managed to escape Yin Beichen's pursuit before long. "Sure, I'll definitely take revenge for destroying my body today. Ha 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 ha." The blood light disappeared into the horizons, leaving behind a sinister laughter. Chapter 488. Blood Crow Palace's lord fled thousands of miles away. The remaining cultivators were dumbfounded. Initially, this was a calamity for Misty Peak. To think that the situation would be reversed the moment a single cultivator appeared. The advantage of Blood Crow Palace and the four major sects was gone. Su Zimo swept his gaze across the crowd with a burning gaze. However, he did not discover perfected being Song Lang and sneered internally. "You sure escaped quickly." Many cultivators shouted and fled in all directions. The Blood Crow King gazed at the terrifying figure standing in midair above the clouds with a venomous gaze. He paused for a moment before retracting his gaze and turning to flee. All of a sudden, Yin Beichen turned around and glared at the Blood Crow King with a gaze as sharp as a knife. "How dare you harbor killing intent towards me?" Instantly, the Blood Crow King felt his hair stand on end and his limbs turn cold. It was as though the blood in his body had stopped flowing. "You, how dare you!" A loud roar reverberated through the clouds and reverberated in the ears of many cultivators in a deafening manner. The next moment, a gigantic saber beam descended from the skies, streaking through the void as though it wanted to slice the world into two. Boom! The earth quaked. The saber beam sank into the fleeing crowd and a blood mist spewed out. The Blood Crow King had just reverted to his true form and wanted to tear through the air when he was sliced down by Yen Baichen without a corpse left. A long blood-colored ravine was left at the foot of Misty Peak with a torrential killing intent. It was filled with corpses and was a shocking sight, as though it was a forbidden blood scar. At least more than 10 Jining Jinjuan died with that single slash. Perfected Jin Dan, a Foundation establishment cultivator, who was beside the blood-colored ravine, could not even withstand the killing intent released by the saber, and many of them died as a result. The calamity of Misty Peak had finally come to an end after Yen Baichen's slash. The many cultivators who survived Misty Peak felt as though they had just survived a calamity. However, the next moment, they felt a sense of sadness as they looked at the corpses strewn across the foot of the mountain. These people were all from the same sect. They had once grown up together at Misty Peak. They had cultivated together, slayed demons, and protected the common people side by side. Years, decades, centuries, and now after a great battle, many of them had already fallen, their faces and voices no longer visible. This was the cultivation world, incomparably cruel. For the first time, Su Zimo felt that the cultivation world was far more brutal and bloody than Songlang Mountain Range. Just now, the old immortal crane had fully recovered from her injuries after consuming the life-death rejuvenation elixir. However, one could already tell that the old immortal crane was aging. In this battle, she had already used up all of her remaining life essence. If he couldn't advance any further, he could only pass away here. The old immortal crane maintained its ferocious bird form and stood on Misty Peak with a single leg, cultivating with its eyes closed. There was a power rumbling within its body that was about to burst out. Countless layers of old skin fell off, and the green feathers were incinerated. However, under everyone's attentive gazes, new skin grew out. Streaks of sparkling green feathers were reborn. The flames that were initially extinguished on her body reappeared once more. Although the flames were small, they emitted a scorching temperature and were growing gradually. The surrounding void was already distorted from the heat. The old immortal crane's condition was gradually improving. Little Crane cried softly and cheered. Patriarch Ling Yun swallowed a bunch of elixirs and supported his severely injured body. Pulling himself together, he began to preside over the situation. First, he ordered all the cultivators on the battlefield to return to the sect immediately to recuperate. He then got the Qi refinement warriors in the sect who did not participate in the battle to come out and clean up the battlefield. Even after experiencing such a calamity, Ling Yun did not panic, displaying his strong ability to control the entire situation. Orders were passed down one after another, and the sect began to operate in an orderly manner. Fellow Taoist, please hold on. Right then, Ling Yun saw that the gauze-robed woman was about to turn and leave. Hurriedly, he called out to her and bowed deeply, saying sincerely, "Thank you for your help this time round, fellow Taoist. Please stay at Misty Peak for a couple of days so that you can be a proper host." "There's no need for that." The gauze-robed woman waved it off with an indifferent expression. Seeing how resolute the gauze-robed woman was, Ling Yun did not insist and cupped his fists. "May I know your name and which sect you are from, fellow Taoist? Today, our sect has encountered a calamity and it's difficult for me to extricate myself. I'll definitely pay you a visit personally in the future to thank you." "There's no need to thank me." Shaking her head, the gauze-robed woman's gaze landed on Su Zimo. "The reason why I helped this time round was because I was entrusted by someone to return a favor." When he heard that, Su Zimo no longer had any doubts. The gauze-robed woman must be Gu Shi. The so-called entrusted by someone should be Demoness Ji. Instinctively, Su Zimo looked around, but he did not catch sight of Demoness Ji. Following the gaze of the gauze-robed woman, he was slightly stunned. "Zimo?" When the elders of Misty Peak heard that, they revealed strange expressions as well. Jining Zhenjuan's appearance was because he wanted to return the favor of a Foundation establishment cultivator? The gauze-robed woman continued, "If you want to thank someone, thank him." With that, the gauze-robed woman did not linger any longer and left. Everyone looked at Su Zimo with endless admiration, as though they had discovered a rare gem in this world. Even without the gauze-robed woman's words just now, Su Zimo's contributions in this battle were undeniable. Furthermore, Su Zimo was at extreme foundation establishment. He was the second person in history after the human emperor. He was able to kill perfected Jin Dan at foundation establishment realm. With such frightening combat strength and talent, his future accomplishments would definitely not be weaker than that person above the clouds. Of course, the key to turning the tide of this battle was Shura of the Fiend sections. Prior to this, the entire Misty Peak hated those from the Fiend sections. As an orthodox immortal sect, their mission was to slay demons, and they were naturally unwilling to associate themselves with them. But now, after this incident, everyone's attitude towards the Fiend sects, or at least towards Yan Beichen, had become somewhat complicated. Regardless of whether Yan Beichen was a traitor of the sect or a heinous demon, it was undeniable that he had saved Misty Peak's lives. Ling Yun wanted to go forward and thank him. However, Yan Beichen was still standing on the clouds thousands of feet high. Given his cultivation, there was no way he could reach that height. Yan Beichen stood with his hands behind his back, his expression cold as he exuded an unapproachable aura. A grand elder shook his head and said, "Forget it. Even if you go forward, given his arrogant personality, he will ignore you." "That's right. After all, we are only his juniors. In the sect, I'm afraid the only one who is qualified to speak to him is Senior Crane," another grand elder said. Ling Yun nodded. Right then, Yan Beichen, who was originally standing on the clouds, suddenly descended. In the blink of an eye, Yan Beichen arrived in front of everyone. His gaze landed on Su Zimo as he said indifferently, "Su Zimo, follow me." With that, Yan Beichen turned and headed towards Thunderclap Valley in Misty Peak. Everyone from Misty Peak was stunned. Just now, the few grand elders who were talking widened their eyes and nearly bit their tongues in shock. These two knew each other. Chapter 489. Everyone from Misty Peak exchanged speechless glances. When they recalled how resolute Yan Beichen was when he rejected Bloodcrow Palace's lord's request to take Su Zimo away, everyone muttered internally. The attitude of the Fiend Sect's Shura towards Su Zimo was rather strange. It did not seem like it was just because Su Zimo was at extreme foundation establishment and pitted the latter's talent. He can't be thinking of taking Su Zimo to Shura sect, right? A grand elder was deeply worried, his brows tightly knitted. After all, Su Zimo's potential was way too great. If he were to stay in Misty Peak, there was a high chance that the sect would prosper because of him. Don't think about it. Even if he does that, there's nothing we can do. Nobody can stop him. That's right. Not far away in the void. Everyone from the Great Zhou dynasty was shocked when they saw that and only came back to their senses after a long time. Even though Ethereal Peak had suffered heavy losses in this battle, however, the remaining cultivators, be it the Foundation Establishment cultivators perfected Jin Dan or Jining Jinjuan, had experienced a baptism of life and death. Their blood was spilled and they would definitely become the pillars of Misty Peak in the future. This calamity would only make Misty Peak stronger. If nothing went wrong, the old immortal crane would advance further and become a Dharma characteristic ferocious beast. It was almost foreseeable that after this battle, Misty Peak's reputation would soar and countless cultivators from the Great Zhou dynasty's territory would flock over. Misty Peak would rise rapidly. As for the other four major sects, they were defeated and returned in defeat. Notwithstanding the loss of 4 void reversions, Jining Jinjuan, perfected Jin Dan and countless Foundation Establishment cultivators died as well. The sect suffered a huge blow. Be it the younger generation of cultivators or top experts, none of the 4 major sects could fight against Misty Peak. If they're not destroyed even after that, it's clear how lucky they are. At the very least, Misty Peak's position will be unshakable for the next 1,000 years. The emperor lamented. This time, when he returned to the royal city, he would prepare many elixirs and medicines and send cultivators to Misty Peak as soon as possible to deliver a big gift. Let's go back. The emperor waved his hand and led everyone away. Su Zimo followed Yan Beichen into the Thunderclap Valley. With a wave of his hand, Yan Beichen set up a barrier, isolating them from the rumbling thunder outside. Then, he quietly looked at Su Zimo with a hint of scrutiny in his eyes. "Did you get the secret manual and the mysterious gold silk armor?" Yen Beichen suddenly asked. Suzimo nodded and said, "Thank you, senior." Yen Beichen pursed his lips and said, "It's said that the Void Thunder Mantra is a secret technique left behind by the Thunder Emperor in his later years. Unfortunately, we only managed to obtain a single page in the primordial battlefield." Thunder Emperor. It was no wonder that he was able to wash away the demonic aura in his blood with the help of the incantation on this page. So the Void Thunder Mantra had such a great background. A moment later, Yen Beichen asked, "You were the one who obtained the Saber Emperor's inheritance in the primordial battlefield?" "That's right," Suzimo admitted frankly. The Sea Calming Manual had been lost for many years, and it was normal for cultivators of the Great Zhou dynasty to not recognize it. However, Shura sect was a supersect of Tianhuang mainland and Yen Beichen was a void reversion expert. There was naturally no way Suzimo's saber technique could hide from him. All of a sudden, Suzimo's heart skipped a beat as he recalled something that he had not figured out previously. 1,000 years ago, in the Saber Mountain Spirit Sea Shura sect, a paragon who used the saber with the many clues before him, something that happened a long time ago gradually became clear. 1,000 years ago, in the primordial battlefield, the paragon of Shura sect who obtained the Saber Emperor's inheritance, the title manual, was you? Suzimo blurted out. Yen Beichen nodded. Realization dawned on Suzimo. It was no wonder why Yen Beichen looked at him with such a strange gaze previously, as though he was looking at a successor of the younger generation. It was not only because he was a disciple of Misty Peak and had obtained the Void Thunder Manual. More than that, it was because the two of them obtained the Saber Emperor's inheritance one after another. "Strike. Let me see how much of the Saber Emperor's inheritance you've obtained." Yen Beichen gripped his palm gently and endless spirit chi gathered in his palm. In the blink of an eye, it formed a long saber with a chilling aura. Without saying anything else, Yen Beichen struck out with his saber right away. Suzimo reacted extremely quickly and withdrew Blood Quencher, going against the flow and using the countercurrent stance of the Sea Calming Manual. Clang! The two sabers collided with a crisp sound and sparks flew everywhere. The power behind that strike was not strong. Suzimo could clearly sense that the reason why Yen Beichen suppressed his strength to a level similar to his was to test out his saber. Yen Beichen's saber strike had already reached the level of force. After that strike, Yen Beichen was expressionless as he twisted his wrist and the next saber strike arrived stealthily. The saber technique was vague and unpredictable. However, its killing intent was suddenly released, causing one's heart to shudder. Not good. Suzimo's heart nearly exploded. Shrouded by that killing intent, Suzimo thought that Yen Beichen was truly going to kill him. Instinctively, he spread his spirit wings and dodged backwards. However, the moment he spread his spirit wings, they dissipated into specks of light that scattered into the void. There was no need to think too much. It was definitely Yen Beichen's doing. Suzimo bent his legs slightly and channeled his bloodline, wanting to leap backwards to dodge. However, immediately after, Suzimo discovered in horror that it was as though there were 3 walls behind him. He could not move at all and could only stand on the spot. "Strike!" Yen Beichen's cold voice sounded, "Otherwise die." Nobody could doubt the killing intent of the Shura of the Fiend sections. He had said before that there was no one in this world that he could not kill and no one that he did not dare to kill. The Shura did not need a reason to kill. Yen Beichen's slash was one of the stances of the Shura saber. In the ancient battlefield, the Fiend heir of Shura sect by Yu had used the same move as well. However, the difference in power of the same slash in Yen Beichen's hands was worlds apart. That slash was untraceable and untraceable. Chapter 490. A moment later, Yen Beichen retracted his saber and stood upright. Suzimo heaved a sigh of relief and could not conceal the excitement in his eyes. Apart from the final stance of the Sea Calming Manual that he could not release, he had already comprehended the other 4 stances to the force level. The reason why he was able to comprehend it so quickly was mainly because of the pressure that Yen Beichen gave him. Otherwise, he might not have been able to reach this level even if he practiced against the air for a few years or decades without an opportunity. If cultivators wanted to truly grow, they had to temper themselves through life and death situations continuously. Of course, what truly excited Su Zimo was not only that he had comprehended the force level. More than that, it was because he was not weaker than the number one paragon of Tianhuang Mainland's north region in terms of saber techniques, even though they were of the same strength. Although Yan Beichen had been immersed in the Tao of the saber for more than 1,000 years, he was not disadvantaged. Awesome! Su Zimo was drenched in sweat and felt refreshed. Yan Beichen's expression was cold and his gaze was calm, as though he could see through Su Zimo's thoughts. Do you think that you're strong enough to defend against my saber? Yan Beichen asked indifferently. Su Zimo remained silent. Based on the exchange just now, although Yan Beichen was suppressing him the entire time, he did not reveal any openings. Instead, he defended against all of the other party's saber techniques. However, even if Yan Beichen saw through this, Su Zimo could not admit it. However, Yan Beichen's next sentence sent chills down Su Zimo's spine. Take a look at your body. Yan Beichen's eyes shone with disdain. Su Zimo frowned slightly and looked down. Instantly, he froze and his pupils constricted. He didn't know when, but the green robe on his chest had already been slashed open, right near his heart. The slashes crisscrossed and formed a large death character. Su Zimo felt his hands and feet turn cold. This meant that if it was a battle of life and death, he would have died 6 times in this short battle just now. The most frightening thing was that he hadn't noticed anything from the beginning to the end. The more Su Zimo thought about it, the more frightened he became. Just now all the pride and excitement had disappeared. If there were no restrictions, Su Zimo might not have lost given his movement technique, speed and terrifying physique of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. But at least in terms of saber techniques, Su Zimo was completely defeated. Yan Beichen touched his storage pouch and 2 ancient scrolls appeared in his palm. He handed them over to Su Zimo. Su Zimo took a closer look and couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Title Sweep. The Saber Sovereign had left behind 2 manuals in the primordial battlefield. One of them was the Sea Calming Manual, which was obtained by Su Zimo. The other was the Title Sweep, which was obtained by Yan Beichen 1,000 years ago. Yan Beichen said, the Title Sweep is not a saber technique, but a secret skill with a total of 9 levels. Back then, the Saber Sovereign created it by observing the tides at the seaside. It interweaves with Tao and Dharma and contains the mysteries of the universe. The Title Sweep and Sea Calming Manuals complement each other. Cultivating the Title Sweep will allow one to cultivate a surge of tidal might. At the first level, one will release an additional level of power with each slash of the saber. That is tidal might. Su Zimo seemed to have understood something. Yan Beichen continued, at the first level of the Title Sweep, one's strength will increase by 10%. At the second level, it will increase by 20%. Don't underestimate that 10% or 20% increase. In a real battle, the difference is way too obvious. Su Zimo was secretly shocked. If he could cultivate the 9th level of tidal might, it would be equivalent to a 90% increase in strength and would be equivalent to double his combat strength. That would be enough to sweep through those of the same cultivation realm. Of course, the greatest use of tidal might is to make up for the flaws of the Sea Calming Manual. Yan Beichen said, your first 4 stances are already at the point of perfection. However, there's still some sluggishness in the transition between hard and soft. It's not smooth enough. In the eyes of ordinary cultivators, these flaws are almost impossible to see. However, if you meet someone truly ruthless, you'll be in danger of losing your life. Su Zimo was enlightened. When he was practicing his saber technique previously, he had indeed felt a slight sluggishness. However, in the ancient battlefield, no one noticed that flaw when he fought against the paragons of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sections. As such, Su Zimo did not pay much attention to it. To think that a flaw like that would be so fatal in the eyes of a true expert. Su Zimo was grateful. He had not expected Yan Beichen to be so decisive and impart the tidal might to him without hesitation. Senior, let me practice the Sea Calming Manual once and I'll teach you the crux of it. Su Zimo's intentions were simple. He wanted to impart the Sea Calming Manual to Yan Beichen as a form of exchange. There's no need. Yan Beichen waved it off with an indifferent expression. I've already begun to comprehend my own Tao. In my eyes, The sea calming manual is nothing much. There was a hint of arrogance in Yan Beichen's tone. He was confident that he would definitely become a conferred emperor in the future, and his accomplishments would definitely surpass the Saber Emperor's. Su Zimo did not insist and moved the title might away. Looking at the second ancient scroll, he could not help but frown. Shura Saber? The other secret skill was the secret technique of Shura Sect, Shura Saber. This, Su Zimo was stunned. Did Yan Beichen's actions mean that he wanted him to join Shura Sect? Su Zimo hesitated for a moment before returning the Shura Saber. I've never thought of leaving Misty Peak. Please take back this Shura Saber, Senior. Yan Beichen glanced at it but did not take it back. Even if you don't join Shura Sect, you can take this saber technique and cultivate it. That's inappropriate, right? Su Zimo frowned. If anyone were to impart such a secret skill of a sect privately, they would definitely be punished by the sect and might even lose their lives. If I dare to impart it, you don't dare to learn it? Yan Beichen sneered. Su Zimo was silent. He had truly gotten into a lot of trouble in the ancient battlefield, and there was truly nothing he did not dare to learn. Furthermore, it was not as though Su Zimo had never cultivated cultivation techniques of the fiend sects before. Chapter 491. 10,000 years ago there was an overlord in the north region of Tianhuang mainland, the Great Qian Empire. It had a vast territory and immense strength. Unfortunately, the prosperous capital at the center of the Great Qian Empire was reduced to ruins overnight. Yan Beichen continued. Not only that, the two monasteries of the Buddhist monasteries in the territory of the Great Qian Empire were destroyed as well. More than 10,000 years ago, the Buddhist monasteries were led by 8 monasteries, not the 6 monasteries of today. Ah! Su Zimo's expression changed as he exclaimed softly. 10,000 years ago, it was the 8 monasteries of the Buddhist monasteries. Because of this catastrophe, not only was a great empire reduced to ruins, even 2 super sects of Tianhuang mainland were wiped out because of it. Su Zimo could not help but ask, what sort of catastrophe is it? Is it related to the witch race? No, Yan Beichen shook his head. It's another lineage of the primordial 9 races, the dragons. Su Zimo opened his mouth gradually in a daze. It was the dragons. He had quite a bit of a feud with the dragons as well. Yan Beichen said, there are many different theories about the cause of this catastrophe. However, the final outcome is, a dragon from the Dragonbone Valley was provoked. Dragonbone Valley? Su Zimo frowned slightly and recalled the endless white bones he saw in the primordial ruin, as well as the dragon skeleton that stretched across the sea of bones and towered into the clouds. The Dragonbone Valley is one of the 9 forbidden grounds of Tianhuang mainland, Yan Beichen explained. Indeed. Su Zimo felt a sense of lingering fear when he recalled his encounter in the Dragonbone Valley. If not for the mysterious Lin Xuanji, he would have died there even if he had 10 lives. Suddenly, Su Zimo recalled what Yan Beichen said just now and his expression changed as he asked in disbelief, just a dragon? A single divine dragon was enough to destroy the Great Qian Empire. Eliminate 2 super sects and change the situation of the entire north region of Tianhuang mainland? Not bad. Yan Beichen nodded and said, an ancestor-level divine dragon. As though he could tell that Su Zimo did not understand the concept of an ancestral divine dragon, Yan Beichen added, its combat power is comparable to the emperors of the human race. Su Zimo was shocked. After a while, Su Zimo calmed down and asked, how many ancestral dragons are there? No one knows. Yan Beichen said, however, ancestral divine dragons are not the strongest among dragons. Dragons also have emperors whose strength is far above ancestral divine dragons. They are called dragon emperors. Su Zimo suddenly felt a burst of suffocation, and the pressure increased greatly. If an ancestor-level divine dragon could fight against a human sovereign, then when the dragon emperor appeared, who in the world could stop him? Yan Beichen said, the primordial 9 races are born strong and can sweep through almost every one of the same cultivation realm. Throughout history there have been many emperors born. However, there are less than 5 emperors of the human race who can fight against the emperors of the primordial 9 races. Su Zimo remained silent. That was the difference. Humans were born weak. That was a fact that could not be changed. Experts of the primordial 9 races did not have to be conferred the title of emperor. They could fight against the emperors of the human race as long as they were at the ancestor level. Pausing for a moment, Yan Beichen continued, the reason why the human race was able to win the ancient war was mainly because of the appearance of a peerless hero like the human emperor who stood above all the other emperors in the ancient era. At the mention of the human emperor, even someone as proud as Yan Beichen revealed a hint of respect in his tone. At that point, Su Zimo gradually understood. The Great Zhou dynasty was not afraid of the palace lord of Blood Crow Palace, but of the true experts of the witch race. The palace lord of Blood Crow Palace is merely a remnant of the witch race with an impure bloodline. Otherwise, his combat strength would not have been so weak. His body was destroyed by me, and he won't be able to recover within a short period of time. There's no need to worry about Misty Peak. However, pausing for a moment, Yan Beichen changed the topic. You were in the limelight in the ancient battlefield, killing the fiend heir of Malevolent Earth Sect, destroying Poison Sect and defeating Glass Palace. You have to be careful from now on. Glass Palace and Malevolent Earth Sect are located in the north region of Tianhuang mainland. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Although no one in Xintian City apart from Jichangtian and the others knew where he came from, given the strength of Glass Palace and Malevolent Earth Sect, it was only a matter of time before they found him. Unless he went into seclusion and hid himself. What worried Su Zimo even more was that Pei Chunyu of Glass Palace was severely injured and had escaped into Mist Valley. There was a high chance that he had returned to Tianhuang mainland alive. That person was a hidden danger. For the first time, Su Zimo realized that there were way too many hidden dangers lurking around him. Glass Palace, Malevolent Earth Sect, Poison Sect, Blood Crow Palace's lord. Once those hidden dangers were to erupt, the consequences would be dire. He had to raise his strength as soon as possible. The hidden dangers around him could erupt at any moment, and the only way he could survive was to raise his strength as much as possible. Yan Beichen turned to leave but paused and said indifferently, "You're at Extreme Foundation Establishment and the second human emperor in history. However, you have to know that everything is illusory without forming a core. In the super sects of Tianhuang mainland, Foundation Establishment cultivators are only outer sect disciples. Only those who form a core can be considered inner sect disciples. That was the difference between those super sects and Misty Peak. In Ethereal Peak, a golden core perfected master could be ranked as an elder. However, he was only an inner sect disciple in those super sections." Yan Beichen continued, "It's said that a monster incarnate in history has been born in Divine Phoenix Island. Although you're at Extreme Foundation Establishment, I'm afraid you'll only stand a 50% chance against that person." Su Zimo did not reply. He could not reveal his identity as the monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island. In the current cultivation world, everyone knew that the monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island had a rare Divine Phoenix bone in his right hand. If he were to attract the mighty figures and patriarchs of the major factions to fight for it, nobody would be able to protect him. Furthermore, although phenomenons are perfected being Jin Dan's strongest techniques, there are differences in strength between them as well. Yan Beichen said, for example, the Jin Dan phenomenons you encountered previously were unorthodox and had limited strength. If you were to encounter perfected being Jin Dan who possesses an ancient phenomenon, even if he's an early stage Jin Dan, he'll be able to kill you. Do ancient phenomenons have to be powerful? Su Zimo asked with a frown. The phenomenons cultivated by the ancient emperors and mighty figure patriarchs have not been erased despite the baptism of time, and have been passed down through the ages. Naturally, their might is unprecedented. Su Zimo asked again, are the Jin Dan phenomenons cultivated by future generations inferior to ancient phenomenons? Yan Beichen shook his head. That's difficult. All of your current cultivation techniques were passed down from the ancient era. It's naturally difficult for the phenomenons you cultivate to break away from the shadows of ancient phenomenons. If you're truly able to create a powerful phenomenon that can fight against ancient phenomenons, it'll be enough for you to enter the annals of history and enter the phenomenon ranking. Phenomenon ranking? Su Zimo was slightly stunned. Yan Beichen said, you should know that the ancient battlefield is made up of dimensional fragments. According to their stability, they're divided into different grades. Yes, Su Zimo nodded. Demoness Ji had told him about this many years ago. Yen Beichen continued, the elementary ancient battlefield can teleport Foundation establishment cultivators and is opened once every 10 years. The intermediate ancient battlefield is even more stable and can allow perfected being Jin Dan to enter for training. It's opened once every 100 years. In the intermediate ancient battlefield, there's a famous divine ranking that has been passed down through the ages known as the phenomenon ranking. There are a total of 108 spots on the ranking and thousands of perfected being Jin Dan are vying for them. Only by leaving their names on the phenomenon ranking can one be worthy of being called a paragon. However, he had never heard of divine abilities. Divine abilities are even more frightening than spirit arts and dharmic arts. Simply put, divine abilities are methods that are beyond your imagination and only exist in legends. When he heard that, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. They were even more frightening than spirit arts and dharmic arts. Yen Beichun said slowly, carrying mountains and chasing moons is a divine ability. Plucking stars with a single hand is a divine ability. Burning the heavens and boiling the seas is a divine ability as well. Summoning the wind and rain and deploying beings to form soldiers are all divine abilities. Su Zimo's mouth opened gradually, and he could not conceal the shock in his eyes. The stars in the skies could be plucked, the seas could be boiled, and the firmaments could be incinerated. Everything had indeed exceeded Su Zimo's imagination. A brand new, mysterious, and majestic world of cultivation appeared in his mind, causing him to be enthralled and excited. Su Zimo suddenly realized something. Although he had already started cultivating a long time ago, he was only at the beginning of the long path of cultivation. How do I cultivate divine abilities? Su Zimo asked impatiently. Yen Beichen shook his head gently. Divine abilities are too far away from you and I can't even cultivate them. Void reversions are known as Dao beings, Dharma characteristic realm are known as Dao lords, conjoint body realm are known as mighty figures, and lastly, Mahayana realm are known as patriarchs. Only those at the Mahayana realm are qualified to cultivate divine ability techniques. Su Zimo was a little disappointed. Right now, he was only at Foundation Establishment realm, and even the Void Reversion realm was out of his reach, let alone the Mahayana realm. However, on second thought, Su Zimo exclaimed softly and asked with a frown, "That's not right. Senior Crane has just broken through, and is equivalent to the Dharma Dao Jun. How did she comprehend divine abilities?" "That's because she's a demon," Yen Beichun said. "After the Void Reversion realm, demons will comprehend a new innate divine ability with every step of the way. The purer their bloodline, the stronger their race, and the more terrifying the innate divine abilities they comprehend." When he heard that, Su Zimo's eyes flickered and he suddenly understood something. There were a total of 9 sections to the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness. The 7th section, Core Formation, corresponded to the Jin Dan realm, the 8th section, Yin Spirit, corresponded to the Nascent Soul realm, and the 9th section, Yang Spirit, corresponded to the Void Reversion realm. After that, the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness was gone. Initially, Su Zimo could not understand why there were only 9 sections to the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness. But now, he finally understood that there was no need for any cultivation techniques or secret manuals after the Yang Spirit section. As long as he took another step forward, he would comprehend his own innate divine ability. Su Zimo asked again, "If demons can comprehend innate divine abilities at the Dharma characteristic realm, and their divine abilities are so strong, how can human cultivators be a match for them?" Yen Beichun said, "When humans enter the Dharma characteristic realm, they will naturally transform as well. They will comprehend heaven and earth and summon supreme dharmic powers to condense heaven and earth dharma characteristics that can fight against the innate divine abilities of demons." Su Zimo seemed to be enlightened. It was similar to demons forming their inner cores after forming their cores. Their strength and speed would increase exponentially, and the toughness of their bodies would reach a frightening level as well. It was not something that the frail bodies of humans could defend against. However, when human elites form their cores and form their Jin Dan, they would cultivate Jin Dan phenomenons. The power of their phenomenons was incomparably strong and could fight against demons. From being enslaved in the primordial era to the rise of the ancient era, the immortal Buddhist and fiend Taoists of the human race had long matured. The rise of the human race was definitely not due to luck. I've severed my karma. It's time to leave. After saying that, Yen Beichen did not linger and soared into the air, speeding into the distance. Little Chun. When the old immortal crane noticed that, she called out hurriedly. In the eyes of the younger generation, Yen Beichen was an old monster with a cold temperament. However, he was only a child when he joined Misty Peak more than 1,000 years ago. The old immortal crane watched him grow up and made his way here step by step. Yen Beichen paused for a moment. However, he did not turn back and continued forward, disappearing into the horizon before long. When he saw that, Su Zimo suddenly understood. After the battle, Yen Beichen did not linger in Misty Peak for such a long time just for him. Yen Beichen was worried about the old immortal crane's safety and was protecting her silently. However, given Yen Beichen's character, he would definitely not say something as such. The old immortal crane sighed gently with a conflicted expression. Su Zimo could vaguely sense that there was more to Yen Beichen's betrayal of Misty Peak more than 1,000 years ago to join the Shura sect of the Fiend sections. Chapter 493. With a shake of her body, the old immortal crane transformed into a beautiful red-haired woman. Her skin was smooth and she looked like she was in her 30s. Waving her robes casually, the old immortal crane extended 1,000 feet and brought Su Zimo before her in the blink of an eye. Congratulations, senior. Su Zimo was truly happy that the old immortal crane was able to break free from the shackles of heaven and earth and regain her lifespan. With the addition of a Dharma characteristic expert to Misty Peak, there would definitely be many itinerant cultivators joining the territory of Great Zhou in the future. The rise of sects was inevitable. I should be the one thanking you. The old immortal crane smiled and looked at a forest outside Misty Peak. Little Chun must have been informed by someone from the fiend sects for him to be able to rush over in time. It must have something to do with you, right? Su Zimo remained silent. I don't have any prejudice against the fiend sections. Head over there and take a look. Someone's been waiting for you for a long time. The old immortal crane pointed to the forest in the distance and said with a smile. All right. Su Zimo nodded and spread his spirit wings, speeding towards the forest. In the depths of the forest, a beautiful figure in pink stood tall. Her black hair flowed like a waterfall and her long dress accentuated her curvaceous figure perfectly. The veil on the girl's face had already been removed, revealing a devastatingly beautiful face as she looked over with a smile. Thank you. Approaching, Su Zimo remained silent for a long time before saying those two words. Exclamation point. Demoness Ji could not help but burst into laughter. Blinking her eyes playfully, she shuffled in front of Su Zimo with light steps. A subtle fragrance wafted over. Their cheeks were only inches apart and Demoness Ji's breath smelled like orchids as she asked, How are you going to thank me? With that said, she bit her red lips and looked at Su Zimo expectantly, seemingly begrudging. Su Zimo lowered his gaze like an old monk in meditation. Not daring to meet her gaze, he took half a step back instead. After half a year, Demoness Ji's bewitching arts had become even more terrifying. Su Zimo lamented internally. Seems like she obtained quite a bit of opportunity back in the human emperor's palace. I won't tease you anymore. She returned to normal and smiled, replying in a relaxed tone, You don't have to thank me. After all, you've saved my life before. Su Zimo breathed a sigh of relief. Pondering for a moment, she whispered, You offended so many people in the ancient battlefield. Why didn't you join the fiend sects with Senior Shura? That senior's temperament is cold and he doesn't recognize anyone. I think he treats you quite differently. Su Zimo shook his head. She continued, There's still 20 years before the intermediate ancient battlefield opens. Misty Peak doesn't have the strength to break through the barrier of the intermediate ancient battlefield. When the time comes, remember to look for me. I'll bring you in. We'll talk about this later. Anyway, there are still 20 years. There's no hurry. Then, I'm leaving? Yes. When Demoness Ji saw that Su Zimo had no intention of keeping her, she harumphed softly in annoyance. She had just turned around when Su Zimo's voice sounded with some hesitation. What does a tripod of pure maiden sect mean? Demoness Ji's back was facing Su Zimo as a look of embarrassment flashed through the depths of her eyes. However, she concealed it quickly and turned around, asking with a fake smile, "What do you think it means?" There was a saying in the cultivation world that tripods were used by evil sect cultivators to capture members of the opposite sex as tripods for dual cultivation, in order to raise their cultivation realms. Time passed and more than 10 days and nights passed. Within the cave abode, the demonic chi around Su Zimo increased, and the 7 orifices on his head shone with a bedazzling divine light. His skin, flesh, tendons, marrow, organs and orifices formed a perfect major heavenly cycle that circulated continuously. Gradually, the demonic chi within and outside of his body began to gather towards the center of Su Zimo's chest. After cultivators formed their chi foundation and formed their cores, their Jin Dan would be condensed an inch below their navel where their Chi Si and Dantian were. But now, the location of Su Zimo's inner core was clearly different for his demonic cultivation. It was in the middle of his chest and was extremely close to his heart. The scarlet demonic chi was endless and gathered continuously in Su Zimo's chest. It spun continuously like a gigantic vortex that was gradually materializing. Be it demons or humans, core formation was an extremely important step on the path of cultivation. This was the conclusion of one's previous cultivation. Once one's core formation was formed, they would break free from the shackles of heaven and earth for the first time, and their lifespans would increase exponentially. If they failed, everything would be over. Su Zimo was motionless and his black hair fluttered without wind. One after another, ancient demons appeared around him with torrential ferocity and menacing fangs while their eyes shone with a scarlet glint. The ancient demons paused for a moment before returning to Su Zimo's body, and were sucked in by the scarlet vortex in his chest. Su Zimo's aura turned increasingly terrifying. As the crimson vortex shrouded him, his flesh underwent another baptism and evolved once again. Su Zimo's flesh expanded and his bones vibrated, buzzing as though metal was clashing. His tendons quivered like a thunderbolt that was shuddering. Chapter 494. At the back of the main peak of Ethereal Peak, the old immortal crane sensed something and was jolted awake from her cultivation. More than 10 days ago, Misty Peak had just experienced a catastrophe and was filled with devastation. Even now, many cultivators of the sect were still recuperating from their injuries and had yet to recover. Although the old immortal crane was cultivating, she was paying attention to the happenings in the sect at all times. Now that she was at the Dharma characteristic realm, her strength had increased tremendously, and her essence spirit cultivation had deepened. Her spirit sense spread out. Within a radius of 1,000 miles, not a single movement could escape her senses. The moment Su Zimo made some movements, the old immortal crane sensed it. What a strong aura! He's about to break through. Although the old immortal crane was still at the back of the mountain, she could see everything in Su Zimo's cave abode clearly with her spirit consciousness. As time passed by, the shock in the old immortal crane's eyes deepened. Even the inheritance memories of pure-blooded ferocious beasts don't have such a powerful demon cultivation technique. The old immortal crane murmured with a grim expression, "This child truly has way too many secrets." Even with her knowledge, she could not see through those secrets. Even with her cultivation realm, she could not understand them. How could a human cultivate a demon cultivation technique? In the primordial era, there were thousands of races and an earth-shaking chaotic war broke out. Countless races were annihilated and were never able to recover from that setback. The races that were left behind formed a massive race that was later known as the demon race. Therefore, there were many types of demons. Birds, beasts, flowers, fishes and insects were all part of the demon race. Demons could be stone bears that were as massive as mountains or ants that were as tiny as dust. In fact, they could even be a single blade of grass or tree in the forest. In the cultivation world, there were many legends of plants that gained sentience and attained the Tao. The fact that there were so many complicated types meant that every single demon had a different body structure and was even more different from humans. For example, the vegetation race of the demon race did not have skin, flesh, tendons, bones, or organs. The bull demon of the demon race had 4 hooves and 2 horns, while the snake demon had no legs or horns. The old immortal crane truly could not imagine how there could be such a terrifying demon cultivation technique that was suitable for humans to cultivate in this world. There was only one possibility. This cultivation technique had absorbed the essence of many cultivation techniques of the demon race. Then, it found the parts of these cultivation techniques that were suitable for humans to cultivate and merged them together. This was a huge project that would consume an unimaginable amount of time and energy. Even the ancient emperors would not have been able to do this. Who was it that created such a cultivation method? What was the meaning of the existence of this cultivation technique? Could it be that this terrifying existence had spent endless effort and racked his brains to create this demon clan cultivation method, just to impart it to Suzimo? The old crane fell into deep thought. It was pitch black inside the cave. Suddenly, Suzimo opened his eyes. They were like 2 bolts of lightning flashing in the dark night, demonic and enchanting. There was a loud thud. Suzimo stood up. His flesh and blood swelled, and his bones mutated. With a series of crackling sounds, his entire body expanded, as if he was going to break through the clouds. In the darkness, there seemed to be an ancient demon rising. Rumble. Boom. Suzimo's body rose continuously and his head smashed through the roof of the cave. The cave abode shook violently, almost collapsing. Countless rocks shattered, but Suzimo's head was perfectly fine. For a disciple like Suzimo, the layout of his cave abode was already the same as perfected being Jindan's cave abode. It was spacious and tall. Perfected being Jindan could soar to a height of 100 feet without any external objects. Naturally, the height of a cave abode had to be more than 100 feet. What did 100 feet mean? It was equivalent to a 10-story building. But now that Suzimo had smashed through the roof of the cave, it meant that his body had already risen to a height of 100 feet. Endless energy surged into his body and gathered at his chest. His body expanded rapidly, causing his flesh to burst apart and burst forth with blood mists. His bones buzzed and his tendons were stretched to their limits. Suzimo was drenched in blood. His powerful self-healing ability continued to repair all the wounds on his body. Destruction, repair, it was a cycle. The aura emitted by his body was getting increasingly terrifying. The process of tearing and healing was extremely unbearable. Suzimo was enduring unimaginable torture. A long time later, Suzimo could no longer hold it in. Hunching his spine, he opened his mouth and the veins on his neck popped as he let out a deep, thunderous roar from the depths of his throat. Roar! It was like a dragon's roar or a tiger's roar that reverberated through the wilderness and shook the world. Late at night was the time when birds and beasts roamed in search of food, and their roars echoed one after another. However, after this roar rang out, the mountains and valleys all fell silent. The old immortal crane snapped out of her thoughts and her heart skipped a beat. The old immortal crane's glabella shone and she released her spirit consciousness hurriedly, forming a pitch-black light barrier that isolated Suzimo's cave abode from the outside world such that neither vision nor spirit consciousness could detect it. The matter of Suzimo's demonic cultivation could not be exposed yet. The hatred of cultivators towards demons was deeply rooted and difficult to change. If the other cultivators of the sect knew that Suzimo was cultivating demonic cultivation, they might not be able to accept it. The commotion was way too great. Many Jining Zhenjuan and perfected being Jindan were alarmed and thought that a strong enemy had arrived. Ignoring their injuries that had yet to heal, they walked out of their cave abodes one after another. Everyone turned towards the source of the sound but could only see a light barrier. They could not see what was happening within. All of you disperse and continue recuperating. There's nothing major here. The old immortal crane's voice sounded in everyone's minds. The cultivators of Misty Peak heaved a sigh of relief and returned one after another. However, their eyes were still filled with confusion. Just now everyone could hear the roar loud and clear. Even Jining Zhenjuan of the sect felt his heart skip a beat. What kind of demon beast was that roar? It was so scary. I'm not sure. It must have a strong background. It should have been suppressed by Senior Crane. The cultivators of the sect discussed softly before dispersing. They could not see that the cave abode had already collapsed within the pitch-black light barrier. Amidst the rumbling dust, A towering figure that was more than 100 feet tall stood. Unknowingly, Su Zimo's clothes had long been torn apart, revealing his bronze muscles that shone with a metallic luster as though they were made of molten iron. Blood vessels appeared on the surface of his body one after another. Green veins snaked all over his body in a frightening manner, as though they were crawling with spirit snakes. This was a body that could be described as perfect. One after another, terrifying phantoms surrounded that body, exuding an ancient and desolate aura. There was a desolate bull that plowed the heavens. There was a mighty and tall stone bear. There was a coiling anaconda. There was a wild and untamed sanguine ape. There was a divine steed that charged forward. There was a ferocious hell tiger. There was a wind leopard that rode on the wind. The 7 ancient demons of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness that had cultivated up till this point had all appeared. Their claws and fangs were menacing and lifelike. On Su Zimo's chest beside his heart, there was a round ball of blood that was spinning slowly, emitting a rich demonic qi. That was the inner core of the demon race. The inner core was formed. Chapter 495. Su Zimo sensed the 7 ancient demons surrounding him and came to a realization. At this point of his cultivation, 7 of the 12 demon kings had appeared. In other words, there were 5 more demon kings that had yet to appear. The mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness should be cultivated to its limit, and all 12 demon kings of the great wilderness would appear. However, Su Zimo did not know who the other 5 demon kings were. The Een spirit section of the mystic classic that Dai Yu left him was shrouded in a layer of fog. Given his current cultivation realm, he could not see through it. In the middle of his chest, a round blood-colored inner core spun slowly. Su Zimo could not conceal the joy in his eyes as he gripped his fists gently. With every single movement, he could feel the immense power that came from every part of his body, as though he could crush mountains with a single punch. This was a qualitative leap. Su Zimo withdrew a supreme-grade flying sword from his storage bag and injected spirit energy into it. The sword shone brightly with a chilling aura. Su Zimo flicked his finger gently on the blade of the sword. Buzz! The sword trembled. The sound of metal clashing could be heard when his body collided against the supreme-grade flying sword. Su Zimo channeled his spirit energy with all his might, and the spirit sea in his dantian rumbled as 9 spirit meridians appeared on his body. Su Zimo took a deep breath of air and his gaze was bright as he channeled the supreme-grade flying sword and slashed his arm heavily. Clang! The flying sword bounced up. His arm was perfectly fine. Although Su Zimo had yet to condense a Jin Dan on the path of immortality, he was an unprecedented extreme foundation establishment cultivator. If he released his full strength, his strength would be comparable to an early-stage Jin Dan. Now when this sword fell, it didn't even leave a single mark on his arm. Even the old immortal crane was shocked when she saw that. The most indestructible parts of demons were their fangs and claws. If a supreme-grade flying sword could not even pierce Su Zimo's flesh, even a perfect-grade spirit weapon might not be able to injure his bones. It was even more impossible for him to injure his organs. The old immortal crane was certain that Su Zimo's current body was even stronger than pure-blooded Jin Dan ferocious beasts. It was because he himself was a pure-blooded ferocious bird. Su Zimo had just stepped onto the path of alchemy and condensed his inner core, but he already possessed such a terrifying physique and flesh. If he continued cultivating and reached the limits of alchemy, the old immortal crane did not dare to imagine. Pa! Right then, a crisp sound echoed from Su Zimo's cave abode. The old immortal crane's pupils constricted and her heart skipped a beat. In each of Su Zimo's palms, there was a broken sword in each of his hands, which was dim and lifeless. Just now that supreme-grade flying sword was actually broken by his bare hands. Even the old immortal crane was dumbfounded. Suddenly, she recalled the pitch-black little beast of mysterious origins that Su Zimo brought back from the outside 4 years ago. When she thought about the frightening fangs and claws of that mysterious little beast, she could not help but lament internally. This child's body right now is probably not inferior to night spirits. To this day, the background of night spirit was still unknown. What 2 monsters? The old immortal crane lampooned internally. Compared to Su Zimo and night spirit, Her bloodline as a pure-blooded ferocious bird was no different from a fowl reared in a cage, within the cave abode. Looking at the broken sword in his hands, Su Zimo could not help but fall into a daze as he recalled the scene of Dai Yu imparting him the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness on that night filled with peach blossoms. Dai Yu once said that if he wanted to take revenge on perfected being Song Lang, he had to cultivate to Section 7 core formation. But now he had achieved it. It had been 8 years since that night. This journey was like a dream or a fantasy. Recalling the memories of him accompanying Dai Yu in the cultivation field back in Pingyang town, Su Zimo remained silent and gradually, he felt a little dazed. Imo. Right then, the old immortal crane's voice sounded from within the cave abode. Don't get distracted. You've only just formed your core. Continue cultivating and stabilizing your cultivation realm. Su Zimo jolted awake. It was only now that he realized that his breakthrough had caused such a huge commotion. The cave abode had already collapsed with dust billowing and debris strewn all over the ground. The only reason why other cultivators were not alarmed was because there was a pitch-black barrier around them. Hurriedly, Su Zimo bowed in gratitude. Thank you, Senior Crane. Su Zimo himself was shocked when he said that. His voice had changed completely. It was sonorous and powerful like a bell that shook one's mind. The old immortal crane said gently, you have to be able to release and retract the power of your inner core freely. Otherwise, how are you going to meet others in this state? The moment you open your mouth, you're going to scare people to death. Su Zimo nodded and no longer hesitated. His massive body swayed and he assumed a lotus position, continuing to cultivate. After forming a core, stabilizing one's cultivation realm, and controlling the power of their inner core was much easier without much risk. As long as he spent time familiarizing himself with his inner core, sensing it and experiencing the many changes in his body, his cultivation realm would gradually stabilize. As time passed by, the phantoms of the 7 demon kings of the great wilderness around Su Zimo gradually faded. His body was shrinking gradually as well. The demonic chi that shrouded him surged into his chest continuously as well. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Dawn broke. A ray of multicolored light dispersed the mist and scattered on a delicate face. His black hair fell casually like a waterfall, fluttering gently. The man closed his eyes and the ray of light gradually expanded and shifted around his body until his entire body shone with a dazzling radiance. Shrouded by the ray of light, his body shone with specks of luster. It was as clear as jade and his flesh was flawless. The man was like an immortal that had descended into the mortal realm, ethereal and calm. This was a true rebirth. All of a sudden, the man opened his eyes, and 2 rays of divine light emerged. They were bright and clear, even brighter than the multicolored light. However, the divine lights dissipated before long. His eyes regained their calmness. Lowering his head, the man looked at his body that had already recovered and nodded in satisfaction. He withdrew a set of green robes from his storage bag and wore them. The man was Su Zimo who had just formed his core. Right now, Su Zimo was already in full control of the power of his inner core. As long as he did not use the power of his inner core, Su Zimo's body would not undergo any obvious changes even if he channeled his bloodline. Unknowingly, the pitch-black light barrier that the old immortal crane used to isolate this place had already been removed. Rising, Su Zimo took a deep breath of air and enjoyed the fresh air of the mountain. His entire body was refreshed, as though every single pore had opened up. The cave abode was already in ruins and could no longer be resided in. Su Zimo's body swayed gently and floated across the ruins, heading outside silently. Suddenly, Su Zimo's gaze shifted and he exclaimed softly, pausing instinctively. Outside the ruins, a young girl was squatting on the ground. She had exquisite features and her arms were wrapped around her knees. However, her golden hair was messy and curly. She had not rested for a long time and her eyes were filled with fatigue. Leaning against a cold green rock at the entrance of the ruins, she dozed off. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat, and he understood immediately. He had created such a huge commotion after forming his core, and must have alarmed many people. Nianqi was worried about him, and that was why she stood guard at the entrance and refused to leave. Nianqi was filthy and her petite face was covered in dust. However, it could not conceal her mesmerizing beauty. Chapter 496. Perhaps the rays of dawn were a little blinding, or perhaps she sensed something after being stared at by Su Zimo for a long time. Nianqi's eyelashes fluttered and she opened her eyes, waking up slowly. Ah! When she saw Su Zimo smiling at her not far away, Nianqi exclaimed and blushed. Nianqi stood up hurriedly and patted the dust off her body. She did not dare to look at Su Zimo and said shyly, "Ugh, I accidentally fell asleep. How long have you been here?" The moment he spoke, Su Zimo realized that his voice had already returned to normal, gentle and warm. 3 days, Nianqi replied. Su Zimo felt a warmth in his heart. 3 days ago was the moment his cave abode collapsed, when he had just condensed his inner core. He was a dual immortal and demonic cultivator. Even if he did not sleep for 3 days, it did not affect him and he was still energetic. However, there was no way a young lady like Nianqi could withstand it. Su Zimo said gently, "Go back and rest." "I'm fine." "Oh." Nianqi nodded and continued. "Master said that your cave abode is damaged and wants you to move to another cave abode." "Master?" Su Zimo froze for a moment. Nianqi said gleefully, "Senior Crane has agreed to take me in as her disciple." "That's great." Su Zimo was genuinely happy and nodded, teasing, "From now on, your seniority will be higher than mine." The old immortal Crane was the strongest and had the highest seniority in the sect. With her personally imparting her knowledge, Nianqi's future achievements were immeasurable. "Don't worry, young master. My cave abode is right beside yours." Nianqi explained hurriedly, "From now on, if there's anything you need, feel free to call for me. Nianqi will help you settle it, just like in most spirit weapon workshop." Su Zimo smiled. "From now on, we're from the same sect and there's no need for us to get along like before." "That won't do. If young master hadn't taken me in back then, how could there be Nianqi today?" Nianqi shook her head and said seriously, "Young master, no matter what realm Nianqi cultivates to in the future, no matter what position I reach, I will always be your little handmaiden." "Nonsense again." Su Zimo laughed and did not take this matter to heart. What he didn't know was that in Nianqi's heart, these nonsense words were a firm and unrepentant vow. Su Zimo said, "Let's go. Take me to that cave." "Yes." Nianqi nodded. The two of them flew in the opposite direction on their swords, one in front of the other. On the way, Su Zimo thought for a while and asked casually, "Did anything big happen these days?" "Nothing much." Nianqi thought for a moment. Many itinerant cultivators joined the sections. The Great Zhou dynasty and the other 4 major sects sent cultivators one after another with gifts to express their goodwill. Misty Peak had a Dharma characteristic expert holding down the fort. Bathed in the flames of war and reborn, its rise was inevitable. This change was naturally within Su Zimo's expectations. Su Zimo pondered for a moment and narrowed his eyes, asking, "Iridescent Cloud's Palace and True Fire sect sent people as well?" "That's right." Nianqi nodded. After pausing for a moment, Nianqi continued, "Don't worry, young master. In the battle at Misty Peak, the void reversions of the other 4 major sects died. Jining Jinjuan, perfected Jin Dan and countless foundation establishment cultivators died. Their vitality is greatly damaged, and they probably won't be able to recover within 1,000 years. They won't be a threat to us." Su Zimo remained silent. Although the 4 major sects already had intentions of submitting, there was an irreconcilable feud between him and perfected being Song Lang. Perfected being Song Lang must have realized that the longer this dragged on, the less chance he had. Su Zimo was at extreme foundation establishment. What sort of potential did perfected being Song Lang have? How could he compare to the growth speed of an extreme foundation establishment? Before long, the two of them arrived before 2 cave abodes. Nianqi smiled. "This is it. Your cave abode is on the left and mine is on the right, young master." "Yes, go and rest." "All right, call me if there's anything, young master." Nianqi did not decline. She was indeed too tired and only headed towards her cave abode after reminding him. "Right." Suddenly, Su Zimo stopped Nianqi and hesitated for a moment before asking, How much do you remember about your childhood? Ah! A look of panic flashed through the depths of Nianqi's eyes. Lowering her head, she stammered, I can't remember. I've always been wandering around the capital of Great Zhou until I met you, young master. Su Zimo looked deeply at Nianqi and did not continue asking. Nodding, he said, It's fine, I was just asking casually. Go on. Nianqi nodded. Not daring to look at Su Zimo, she jogged towards the cave abode behind her. Looking at Nianqi's back view, Su Zimo was deep in thought. Actually, Nianqi's background had always been mysterious. Back in Mo's spirit weapon workshop, Su Zimo already knew about it. It was not only because Nianqi was born with divine strength and a shocking cultivation speed, but also because of a detail. Back then, when the two of them met for the first time and Su Zimo handed Nianqi some dry rations, the night spirit in his embrace actually took the initiative to lean over and sniff Nianqi. There were not many things that could pique the interest of the night spirit. The dragon egg in the Dragon Bone Valley was one of them, of course. That alone was not enough to confirm that there was anything wrong with Nianqi's background. Most importantly, from the moment Su Zimo met Nianqi, the latter was already 14 or 15 years old. Now that 4 years had passed, Nianqi still looked like a young girl. Time did not seem to have left a single trace on Nianqi's body. That was impossible. Unless Nianqi was born with a long lifespan, and 4 years was almost negligible compared to her long lifespan. What sort of person, or rather what sort of race, would possess such a long lifespan the moment they were born? A vague answer appeared in Su Zimo's mind. That answer might not be accurate. After all, there were countless treasures and rare fruits in Tianhuang mainland. Nianqi might have consumed some sort of immortal fruit or elixir in the past that resulted in her being born with divine strength and extending her lifespan. The reason why the old immortal crane chose to take in Nianqi as her disciple must be because she noticed something. Of course, Su Zimo did not suspect that Nianqi had ulterior motives. Although Nianqi wanted to hide her background, she was a pure and kind girl who did not have any ill intentions towards him or Misty Peak. Who didn't have secrets? Su Zimo had his own secrets as well. He would not casually mention his demonic cultivation to others. It's nothing much. After all, I didn't leave my name on the phenomenon ranking. The phenomenon ranking is far beyond our reach. Fellow Taoist, the fact that you're qualified to compete for the phenomenon ranking is proof of your strength, Sima Ji praised hurriedly. Perfected being Songlang smiled as well. 80 years ago, fellow Taoist Liang Heng nearly left his name on the phenomenon ranking as well. The next time you compete for the phenomenon ranking, you'll definitely be able to get a top 10 spot. Yes, Liang Heng nodded, pleased with the flattery of the two of them. He did not have much of a relationship with perfected being Song Lang. The reason why he came this time round was mainly because he heard that Su Zimo possessed a connate spirit weapon. If he could obtain that connate spirit weapon, he would definitely be able to leave his name on the phenomenon ranking the next time he entered the ancient battlefield. Of course, it was a fool's dream if he wanted to get a top 10 spot. The top 10 of the phenomenon ranking were each more frightening than the other. Sima Ji asked, Su Zimo must be in seclusion at Misty Peak right now and won't appear before he forms a core. Is there any way to lure him out? I have a female disciple named Chan Mengqi who was his childhood sweetheart. Perfected being Song Lang narrowed his eyes and said confidently, as long as he hears that the last doesn't have long to live, he'll definitely come down the mountain. Sima Ji's eyes lit up and he nodded to himself. The formation master at the side, Tan Hao, pondered for a moment before saying with a smile, 3 questions. First, the two of them were childhood sweethearts. Would he come down the mountain for someone who's about to die? Definitely. Perfected being Song Lang's tone was certain. Alright, second question, Tan Hao said. The location can't be set in Iridescent Cloud's palace. Otherwise, the fish might not take the bait. That's for sure. I know what to do and have a plan. Perfected being Song Lang was confident. Tan Hao nodded and continued, third question, how do we catch the fish if it takes the bait? The battle at Misty Peak, that's going to have quite a bit of influence in the cultivation world. I heard that Su Zimo is at Extreme Foundation Establishment and has the ability to kill perfected Jin Dan above his level. There are 5 of us perfected Jin Dan. Why should we be afraid of a single Foundation Establishment cultivator? Gao Hu asked. Tan Hao replied, we're not afraid, we're worried that something might happen. If he escapes, we won't have a second chance. With me around, he's dead for sure. Liang Heng said coldly. Everyone, listen to me. Perfected being Song Lang said in a deep voice. This lad is at Extreme Foundation Establishment and has many trump cards. He possesses spirit wings and knows an extremely frightening secret skill that can even fight against my Jin Dan phenomenon. When they heard that, Liang Heng and the other two's expressions changed slightly. The rumors were true. A secret skill released by a Foundation Establishment cultivator could fight against Jin Dan's phenomenon. Even if perfected being Song Lang's Jin Dan phenomenon was not strong, that was shocking enough. Even a lion uses its full strength to catch a rabbit. Since I've chosen to attack, I won't underestimate my opponent. Even if he's only a Foundation Establishment cultivator. Perfected being Song Lang said in a deep voice. Fellow Taoist Tan Hao, you've got to set up a formation beforehand to prevent that lad from escaping. No problem, Tan Hao smiled. With me setting up the formation, even perfected Jin Dan won't be able to escape. Perfected being Song Lang narrowed his long, narrow eyes and said coldly, let me show you guys what I've truly prepared for this lad. With that said, perfected being Song Lang took out a jade bottle from his storage bag. Inside was a bright red flower that resembled an orchid and gave off a faint fragrance. The other perfected Jin Dan beings swept their gazes and their expressions changed starkly as they held their breaths and retreated. Spirit Lock Flower. Liang Heng frowned and asked, that fiend flower has been extinct since the ancient era. Where did you get it from? The Spirit Lock Flower would not cause any direct harm to cultivators. However, the fragrance of the flower possessed a demonic power that could restrain a cultivator's spirit energy, such that even perfected Jin Dan could not resist it. The Spirit Lock Flower was one of the extremely famous fiend flowers of the ancient era. Looking at the killing intent in perfected being Song Lang's eyes, he was probably going to have to sacrifice this disciple of his in order to kill Su Zimo. That traitorous disciple is going to be a disaster if we keep her by our side. Perfected being Song Lang narrowed his eyes and said coldly, coincidentally, she's going to form her core recently, Fufu. It's not that easy to enter the Jin Dan realm. It's only normal for accidents to happen along the way. A month later, Misty Peak. In the cave abode, Su Zimo sat cross-legged with his palms facing up on his knees. His eyes seemed to be closed and his aura was even. His entire body emitted a tranquil and ethereal intent that made him seem ethereal like an immortal. After an unknown period of time, Su Zimo opened his eyes and let out a long breath, waking up from his meditation. It's still not working. Su Zimo shook his head. For the past month, he had been cultivating with chi condensation while comprehending the title manual and Shura Saber, summarizing the many spirit arts and secret skills that he had mastered ever since he entered the Immortal Tao. Although the Immortal Tao and Demon Tao were both core Taoists, there was a stark difference between them. The demonic Tao was completely about controlling one's mind and condensing demonic chi continuously. When the conditions were right, one could subdue dragons and tigers before condensing an inner core. However, the Immortal Tao was more about comprehension. Not only would it be easy to cause problems by forcing core formation, the Jin Dan phenomenon formed might not be able to meet one's expectations. Therefore, Su Zimo did not dare to be careless. Half a month ago, his spirit energy had already reached its limits and his spirit sea could no longer expand. In other words, he was already at the peak of extreme foundation establishment. Under such circumstances, Su Zimo attempted to form his Jin Dan for core formation. Up till this point of his cultivation, he had dabbled in too many things. Not only did he cultivate Immortal Tao cultivation techniques, he even cultivated many Fiend Tao cultivation techniques. However, Immortals and Fiends had different Taoists and were far apart. Immortals emphasized on the natural Tao and the unity of man and nature. As for Fiends, They were extremely stubborn and walked unconventional paths. Su Zimo's spirit energy was of the fire attribute to begin with. However, many of his cultivation techniques such as the Sea Calming Manual, Tidal Manual and Blood Refinement Fiend Sutra were related to water. Immortals and fiends were incompatible and water and fire were incompatible. Half a month had passed and Su Zimo had yet to take that step forward. If he tried to form his core forcefully, there would definitely be a huge problem. The timing isn't right. Su Zimo was in deep thought. In terms of cultivation, the right time, right place and right people were required to break through the barrier of major cultivation realms. One had to comprehend heaven and earth, encounter opportunities and coincidences, and combine many factors together. Some people comprehended the Tao by watching the water beside a stream. Some had an epiphany after touring the famous mountains and rivers. Some formed their core on a whim after listening to the wind and watching the rain fall. Some severed their mortal ties and resolved karma. With that, their thoughts were clear and they formed their Jin Dan. Of course, there were even more who stopped before they formed their core and regretted that they grew old. Su Zimo rose and floated down from the bed. His gaze was clear, calm and deep as the sea as he murmured softly, "Seems like it's time for me to go out for a walk." Right then there was a soft knock on the door. Su Zimo waved his sleeves and the door opened. Nian Qi stood at the door and looked inside. "What is it?" Su Zimo came to her side and asked softly as he looked at the paper crane in her hands. The paper crane was the most common method of communication in the cultivation world. It was a type of talisman and was created by one of the 4 unorthodox groups, the Chiguramon. Nian Qi handed the paper crane over. "This is for you, young master." It's written on the outside of the paper crane that it's an old friend from Pingyang town. Su Zimo frowned slightly. There was probably only one person who could be called an old friend of Pingyang town, and knew of the paper crane communication technique. Su Zimo received the paper crane and opened it slowly. There were a few lines of beautiful and fresh handwriting written on the paper crane. "Zimo, I failed to form my core and my spirit meridians were shattered. I'm severely injured and have returned to Pingyang town to recuperate. Our relationship has been severed and I shouldn't have disturbed you. However, recently I feel that my lifespan is approaching and I don't have much time left. I hope that you can return and see me one last time. Shunmeng Qi." Chapter 499. At the end of the handwriting, it seemed to be slightly messy due to exhaustion. After reading it, Su Zimo's expression was calm and there were no emotions in his eyes. Curious, Nian Qi could not help but lean over to take a look. It's her. Nian Qi still had some impression of Shunmeng Qi. The woman following behind perfected being Songlang outside Mo's spirit weapon workshop that day was Shunmeng Qi. Nian Qi said, "Young master, could it be a forgery? Be careful of any traps." "There's nothing wrong with the handwriting." Su Zimo replied before sneering coldly, "However, there's definitely a trap." The more time passed, the more afraid perfected being Songlang would be. Therefore, Su Zimo was certain that perfected being Songlang would definitely make a move. However, he was on Misty Peak and perfected being Songlang had no chance at all. Therefore, no matter what news came, be it from Pingyang town or somewhere else, perfected being Songlang only had a single motive: to lure him down the mountain. When Nian Qi saw that Su Zimo was calm and did not lose his rationality, he was relieved. However, right after, Su Zimo's next sentence shocked Nian Qi once more. "I'm preparing to head down the mountain." "Ah." Nian Qi frowned and asked, "Young master, you're still going despite knowing that there's a trap?" "That's right." Su Zimo smiled and looked into the distance. A cool breeze blew and his black hair danced gently. Su Zimo seemed to be immersed in his memories as he said softly with a slightly emotional expression, "It's just nice that we're all here. Let's settle the past and settle our grudges together." However, the other party has already prepared in advance and must have many methods to target you, young master. Nian Qi revealed a worried expression and analyzed calmly, "Young master, you haven't entered the Jin Dan realm yet. There's really no need for you to take the risk. Don't worry. If the situation doesn't seem right, I'll leave first." Su Zimo smiled faintly and said, "Moreover, I haven't made any progress in my attempt to break through the Tao of alchemy recently. I'm thinking of going out for a walk. Not waiting for Nianqi to continue persuading, Su Zimo had already driven the flying sword, turned into a stream of light, and broke through the sky. 10 days later, Pingyang Town late at night. The long street was cold and cheerless. There were no pedestrians. It was completely silent. There was a house not far from the Shen family. It was pitch black inside one of the houses. Suddenly, in the darkness, a pair of eyes lit up, and a thin figure was faintly discernible. The man's ears twitched and he whispered, "Someone's coming." Immediately after, another low voice sounded from the side. "Brother Liang Heng is indeed powerful. Your skills are so profound that we didn't even notice it." As he spoke, a few more pairs of eyes lit up in the house. A few figures appeared one after another. It was perfected being Song Lang's group of 5. Not long after, the sound of clothes fluttering in the air could be heard. The speed was extremely fast. Judging from the direction this person was heading in, there was no doubt that it was Pingyang Town. The 5 of them exchanged glances with a hint of killing intent. Perfected being Song Lang came to the window and looked outside through a gap. Not long after, a green figure arrived above the Shun residence. His sleeves fluttered as he stood in midair on a flying sword with a calm expression. When he saw that, perfected being Song Lang's lips curled into a smile unconsciously. The fish has taken the bait. Turning around, perfected being Song Lang nodded to Liang Heng's group of 4. "Do we strike now?" Gao Hu rubbed his palms with a ferocious gaze. He could not wait any longer. "Let's wait a little longer. There's no hurry." Perfected being Song Lang was extremely calm as he whispered, "Let's observe if there's any experts following behind this lad. Don't fall into his trap." "That's right." Sima Ji nodded. "Expert? What expert?" Liang Heng sneered. "If perfected Jin Dan is here, it's useless no matter how many of them come. I can take him down single-handedly. As for Jining Zhenjuan, Fu, which Jining Zhenjuan do you guys think would be so bored as to accompany this lad all the way down the mountain just to catch a glimpse of his lover?" Gao Hu nodded his head to express his agreement. "There's nothing wrong with being more cautious." Perfected being Song Lang added with a slight frown. Su Zimo had already fallen into the trap, and everything was going according to plan. However, for some reason he felt uneasy and felt that something was amiss. "Isn't everything going too smoothly?" A moment later, perfected being Song Lang suddenly asked. "Fu." Liang Heng could not help but scoff and shake his head. "Song Lang, you're truly way too paranoid. We've planned for so long and left so many backup plans. What are you worried about?" "I don't know either." Perfected being Song Lang shook his head. In his mind he could not help but recall how Su Zimo intentionally provoked him in Pingyang Town 8 years ago to save his life. He recalled how Su Zimo embarrassed him in front of Mo's spirit weapon workshop and toyed with him in the palm of his hands without even showing up. This lad is extremely difficult to deal with. How did he fall for it so easily? Perfected being Song Lang was still worried. Tan Hao asked softly with a calm expression, "What's his cultivation realm when you saw him earlier on?" "Foundation establishment." The moment perfected being Song Lang said that, he froze for a moment. The other 4 could not help but laugh as well. "I've been worrying too much." Perfected being Song Lang smiled. "Since he's at Foundation establishment, there's truly nothing to worry about. Even if we didn't prepare such methods, it's still a piece of cake for the 5 of us to take down a Foundation establishment cultivator together." Gao Hu grinned. Above the Shen family, Su Zimo stood on his sword with a mocking look in his eyes. Back when he attained greater mastery of the orifice clearing section, he had already cultivated to the realm of being able to see everything. Now that he had formed a demon core, his hearing was even more frightening. Let alone the whispers of perfected being Song Lang and the others not far away. If Su Zimo wanted to listen, he would be able to hear everything within 1,000 feet, even if it was the sound of ants crawling underground or the sound of mosquitoes flapping their wings. Initially, Su Zimo wanted to charge over and kill perfected being Song Lang and the other 4. However, his gaze shifted quickly and landed on the courtyard of the Shun family beneath his feet with a confused look in his eyes. The Shin family was cold and only 2 of the 4 rooms in the courtyard were occupied. The person in the south room had an extremely fast heartbeat, as though he was extremely nervous. His breathing was heavy. It was a man who had never cultivated before. If he was not wrong, that person should be Shun Nan. The west room was filled with a thick aura of old age. The aura of the person living there was weak and barely discernible. He should not have much time left. Su Zimo's nostrils flared and he caught a whiff of a strong herbal scent. The person in the room was severely injured and beyond cure. How could this be? Su Zimo furrowed his brows slightly. In his opinion, since the handwriting on the paper crane was real, it meant that Shun Mengqi and perfected being Song Lang were on the same side. If that was the case, everything written on the paper crane was fake and was only meant to deceive him here. If that was the case, how could Shun Mengqi truly be severely injured and on the verge of death? Instantly, two possibilities flashed through Su Zimo's mind. First, Shun Mengqi wanted to deceive him here before she died so that she could drag him down with her. Second, she was merely an abandoned chess piece. Su Zimo had a conflicted expression and sighed internally. At that moment he already had an answer in his heart. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.